It's time to rock and roll again. So, good morning, America. Second day of ISOJ, the best conference ever, right? So we are ready for a great second day at ISOJ. We apologize for the inclement weather. It was cold this morning. I know these people who are facing snow in the north today are looking at us with envy, but you know, well, I promise that it would be a little better in a few minutes. Anyway, we're gonna introduce you now the keynote panel that will be at the hands of my friend Evan Smith. And we have the pleasure to have the keynote speaker, Ben Smith from BuzzFeed. So it's gonna be Smith versus Smith.
It's versus. It's not versus.
Oh, because I know you.
No.
Yeah, I don't think that was the deal.
All right, a little bit. Yeah, I am indeed Evan Smith. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the Texas Tribune. I want to say thank you, Rosenthal, for having me back to your conference. This is always a great treat to be here and a great pleasure. Let me acknowledge R.B. Brenner, the head of the journalism school program at the University of Texas at Austin, who is 1 month away from freedom and will no longer be running this program, but has been an integral part of all of our lives here in journalism in Texas and deserves much more credit than he receives. I am so pleased to be here today to introduce and to welcome to Austin Ben Smith, the editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed. It will come as a surprise to you to learn that all people whose last names are Smith are not related. But if he is not my brother, he is my brother in arms, or I'm his brother in arms. Like other digital media entrepreneurs, I greatly admire what Ben has built since taking the top editorial job at BuzzFeed in January of 2012. He transformed an organization that was simple-mindedly dinged for being all cat gifs and listicles and virality into a global news behemoth with more than 300 reporters and editors, 20 content verticals, and more than 200 million monthly unique visitors. These days, in an intensely competitive journalism ecosystem, BuzzFeed's daily reporting and scoops on a wide range of subjects are legitimately must-reads. Exhibits A through Z, the Steele dossier, published in the name of public interest on January the 10th, 2017. This was the full unverified Steele dossier, controversially published by BuzzFeed at the time. The sweetest success, or revenge, I should say, the sweetest revenge is success. And here we are a year plus later talking about the Steele dossier this very moment as a result of the Comey book and the Mueller investigation, and I know we're going to talk about that today. Ben arrived at BuzzFeed after 4 years as senior political writer at Politico. Before that, he wrote a column and a blog for the New York Daily News, created the Politicker blog for the New York Observer, served as City Hall bureau chief for the New York Sun, and was a stringer for the Wall Street Journal in Latvia. That last bit of work experience, the time in Latvia, was the basis for a really terrific, widely heralded piece Ben wrote and published last week in BuzzFeed. Ben is a native New Yorker and a graduate of Yale. Please join me in welcoming Ben Smith.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the kind words, Evan. Thanks so much for having me. The downside of not having a PowerPoint presentation is I'm going to stand under this giant picture of myself for 5 or 10 minutes before Evan turns on me. And you know, we talked a little about I'm giving sort of a brief intro to how BuzzFeed went from being the world's leading cat website to doing some journalism that I hope speaks for itself. But and I think we remain the world's leading cat website as well. Yeah, we don't shy away from that. But actually, I think that's at this point, I hope the journalism really does speak for itself, and you can read that or watch that story elsewhere. And I think and in particular, I think we've been on a run lately that I feel really good about. If I can boast a little, we broke the growth at any cost Facebook memo the other week, and Christopher Steele's other report on an alleged murder in Washington. And the third big story that we broke just in the last couple weeks was the one that I thought, for this audience who pays a lot of attention to journalism and to how information travels online, it would just be sort of interesting in talking about for a few minutes, because it's something that I've been really troubled by and have been wrestling with over the last couple of weeks. And that's the story which you've probably seen in various forms of this really large caravan from Central America headed for the United States. That a couple of weeks ago, you may have learned about it because our president started tweeting about it, sort of out of the blue a couple weeks ago, that there was this giant caravan, and he was in turn reacting, of course, to a report on Fox and Friends. But the actual only source of information at that point was our reporter, Adolfo Flores, who had been down there for a couple weeks, who was the only reporter on the ground with the caravan, and who was in this hallucinatory situation at some point of seeing the President of the United States distort his reporting live on television while he sitting having breakfast in, I guess at that point, in Oaxaca with a bunch of migrants, is kind of tweeting back, no, in fact, they aren't all rapists. There have not been reports of rape here, trying to sort of stick to the facts. So we had initially heard about the caravan from Adolfo, who covers an immigration beat out of LA and is very well sourced, and had kind of heard last November that there was going to be this kind of extraordinary attempt to walk and bus and train from Honduras and Guatemala all the way up to the border to seek political asylum, to the U.S. border. And he persuaded us that it was worth the expense and the risk to do that. And he thought it was interesting, partly because the size was really almost unprecedented, the size of the group. And they had a kind of a clear political voice and mission as well. And so when he published his first story, March 23rd, it's one of the stories is going to be a big story, because it was just both incredibly well told, but also told stories that I think that nobody in American politics particularly wanted to hear. On one hand, he didn't pander to anybody, and it was a story really about, primarily his characters were women and children who were waking up early and walking all day, and in part because of U.S. foreign policy in Honduras, were fleeing a place that they could no longer be. But it also didn't, I think it hit a nerve in part also because it didn't pander to, I think if you go back and read the early liberal European press coverage of Syrian refugees, there's an impulse to write about migration like it's like the forces of the tides. There aren't people making political decisions, there aren't leaders, there aren't actors, there aren't politics around it, there isn't going to be a political reaction. And Adolfo also wrote about that this was, a movement with an organizational structure and a political point of view and a plan. And that is what the right-wing Twitter initially, seized on and distorted to the degree that there was a Breitbart reporter out there trying to correct the facts and saying, because they said, because in fact the whole point was to walk to a port of entry and seek asylum, which is legal, which is a legal form of immigration. And that was to me when it was like this, that things have gotten out of hand when the Breitbart reporter is trying to correct conservative Twitter and say, no, this is actually legal. And then it jumps to Fox, it jumps to Trump. And, and this is it was still kind of shocking to me, but not, I think at this point, surprising how thin that fabric is between accurate reporting, wild distortions on social media and Fox, policy being made in the White House, troops dispatched to the border. I mean, just the sort of tightness of that loop still is shocking to me. But I think at this point, that's a story that we are pretty familiar with in this administration. And the thing I'm about to talk about is not intended to set up a parallel between the president smearing migrants as rapists, which is what he did specifically, and a kind of, to me, still worrying reaction from the more responsible establishment media. So when I kind of got done being shocked by the way Fox covered it, the way it played on Twitter, by Trump's false statements, I sort of saw it play out in other outlets. There was a New York Times story that sort of told the story I just told about how the right-wing media seized on this. Also kind of misstated what the caravan was doing. Said that many of them were headed for Mexico. The whole point was that they were headed for the U.S. It was and the Times, kind of in the interest of pointing out how wrong Trump was, got this quite important fact, in my view, pretty wrong. On the Media, the great public radio show, did a big segment on this again, the point of which was Trump is, totally full of shit here and has seized on these kind of wild distortions. And on the Media report, they had these, very specific claims that the word caravan had been a mistranslation, for instance. The word caravan is on the organizer's website in English. that it wasn't that this wasn't really that unusual. No, it was really quite unusual. There was this sort of looseness about the factual reporting and we were very sensitive to this because Adolfo for many days was the only reporter on the ground, and you could see, well, we are the only source of facts, very unusual situation, and then watch them head out through this kaleidoscope. Yeah, and then the host, Brooke Gladstone, who was a kind of great reporter, also made an odd slip in this broadcast. She said that our headline had been unfortunate. And that's unfortunate, not inaccurate, just unfortunate. So I, of course, wrote like a 9,000-word letter to Brooke, grumbling about this. But I think there is also a more important point to make here, because in this environment, there's this organized effort by Fox News, by Sinclair, by the White House to distort what we're doing, to smear us, and which is, say, us, reporters who are basically out there trying to get things right. And in which the president is making these wild misstatements of facts. And I think that there's like a reasonable impulse sometimes to see journalism as a corrective to that, as a reaction to that, and to think about, our goal isn't to figure out whether a story is true or false, it's whether it's like fortunate or unfortunate. And that, to me, that's very much a trap that, in a way, a trap that Trump and that this kind of bad faith media criticism is laying for all of us, which is to say that, if they persuade enough people that we aren't trying to be fair, aren't trying to get things right, that maybe we will at some point stop trying, and what they're saying will become true. And so I guess my own conclusion is that if you're really trying to do good reporting in 2018, you do have to push back very, very hard on the distortions that really, I've just never seen anything like this velocity and ludicrousness of the distortions of this reporting that come out of the White House. But you also need to resist this kind of mindless reflex to become their mirror image, and to imagine that your job is to resist rather than to report. So anyway, yes, there's my slightly out of context rant for the morning. And I look forward to talking to you, Evan.
So you left me a lot of room. I want to start. I
forgot to talk about Michael Cohen.
Or anything, right. Well, I want to start, though, with what you just said. You mentioned our president, and you mentioned specifically this idea of what the job of the press is with regard to this administration and this president. Marty Baron's going to be here later, and I have great admiration for Marty's statement early in the administration when the president began to attack the media generally and the Post specifically, that it was the job of the media not to go to war but to go to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've kind of seized on this sort of related parallel analogy about playing handball versus playing tennis, that our job is not to play tennis, our job is to play handball. And I'm interested, we're not supposed...
You have to elaborate on that
one. I will. Our job is not to get engaged competitively with the administration in the sense of batting everything back and forth. Our job is to basically just hit the ball back to ourselves over and over. We're not focused on them, we're focused on reporting. What you said is focus on reporting, don't focus on the reaction by them to what you're doing. And I think it's got to be difficult if you're in the news business these days, as you say, to hear your work presented back to you in a form that you don't recognize. That's either mischaracterized or outright lied about. And how do you resist the temptation, we're all human, to push back? Obviously, you've been able to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, I do think, you're right, but it is a crazy experience. I can't think of anything crazier. Adolfo sitting in some breakfast place in Oaxaca eating pancakes, oddly enough. And seeing on television the president who's lie about what is happening right around him, and how do you not just have a panic attack? It's
right.
a very strange. And what he did, he reported. I have not. What he said does not match what I've seen in my reporting, and then he went and got comment from the organizers who said there, also didn't. And there is something kind of not chest thumping about that.
Well, the cure is more accurate reporting.
Yeah, and
it's not necessarily fighting.
And it's not sort of. It's not turning it into theater.
And I think about to come to the dossier, which is really a related topic. When you think about the reaction to the dossier being published at the time, I think the president referred to you all, BuzzFeed, in a press conference as a failing pile of garbage. That was his exact phrase. And getting attacked by the president these days is one of those you haven't made it in this town unless moments, right? But they attacked you for having done this, of course, questioned the accuracy of it. And really up through this week, there have been questions in the minds of a lot of people about whether what's contained within the dossier is or is not true, what degree of it is true, and really both the Comey memo Comey book and then the McClatchy reporting last night about Michael Cohen. All of a sudden we're talking about the dossier again, and the decision to publish this and the accuracy of the dossier is kind of coming back around to the place where you began, is it not?
Well, you know, we began by reporting that it was a document of incredible public importance that had not been verified.
You wrote in the Times specifically that this was in the public interest to have this,
and I think,
right?
you know, I mean, and I think that, you know, this was a document that had been briefed to 2 presidents of the United States. That is an extremely high bar for the public interest. Like,
right.
There's not a lot. You're going to struggle to find reports that are in that category. And I think what's happened, and when we published it, the president's critics, I think, celebrated it to some degree, and a lot of Republicans attacked us. And in this sort of polarized Washington world, that's totally normal. The interesting thing over the last year was that the Republican point of view, which had been this dossier is irrelevant, shifted to actually this dossier is incredibly relevant, that it was used in the Nunes released as the basis for a FISA warrant, that it was, in their view, overused, but that it was certainly a central part of what was happening in the American kind of legal and national security establishment.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, a year later, I mean, it's interesting, because when we did publish it, there's a lot of debate, really, over whether it
a lot of hand-wringing, both in the political universe, but also in the media, quite frankly.
And it is interesting. I mean, I'm sure there are people here who disagree, but a year later, I have not had anyone come up to me and say, you know, I wish you hadn't published that. I would have preferred to sort of stumble through the year 2017 totally confused about
not knowing
what was going on.
Ben, how much of the criticism of the publication of the unverified dossier was about the dossier itself being published, and how much of it was about the fact that BuzzFeed published it? I wondered if the Washington Post had published the dossier, or if the Journal had published the dossier, that the reaction might have been different than BuzzFeed, which people felt the right to sort of dismiss out of hand. It somehow infantilized the whole experience of publishing the dossier.
You know, it's a competitive business, and there's always, and the politics of media should never be understated. I mean, it was an unusual situation. CNN had done this. A handful of outlets had copies, including us, and were sending reporters all over the place trying to report out details. And then CNN had done what to me was a quite odd thing, which was to say, you know, I have in my hand this secret thing that has dark and mysterious allegations.
I'm not going to show it to you.
President of the United States, but I'm not going to elaborate on.
Yeah.
And sort of walked it halfway out, which maybe at some point, it's hard for me to think of when that could have been a tenable position. Right.
So what happens a year later, just to close the loop on this part of the conversation, what happens a year later is on January 18th of this year, basically a year and a day, or about a year after, let's call it a year after the dossier is published, Michael Cohen sues BuzzFeed. Not just BuzzFeed, but sues you all for defamation over, I want to say among other things, I don't know if it was entirely contained to what was in the dossier, but basically over what he said were these false claims that were defamatory related to the publication of the dossier. And one of the things that comes out in this suit is, particularly what's defamatory, is this claim that he had gone to Prague, right?
Yes.
And then yesterday we find out, in fact, he went to Prague.
You know, that Prague.
Oh, right, yeah. Right, my response to that was checkmate, right? There you go. Yeah, I mean,
you know, that was a McClatchy report yesterday.
We'll have to see if
sure was
the
interesting
McClatchy,
to say.
right? But the fact that, I mean, we talked before this. McClatchy publishing the story, they're publishing it with pretty high confidence that this is right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, so again.
Yeah, hell of a thing.
Hell of a thing. You've been running the news side of BuzzFeed, the editorial side of BuzzFeed now for a little bit more than 6 years.
Yeah.
Which is a lifetime or more than one lifetime in the business that we're in right now.
Yes.
It was a vastly different world when you went. Why did you go, and what have you learned?
How long you got? So on the second question, so really why I went, to sort of compress it, is that as political, I'd been a blogger when blogs were the center of the universe, and when it felt very sort of where political news was breaking and where political conversations were happening, maybe 2004 to 2008, were these blogs. The way to get traction would be that I would attack Nate Silver, and then I'd email him and say, hey, I just attacked you, but I gave you this big link. When you rebut me, would you make mine linking above the part you quote? And that was, there was a real energy in that space. And then in 2009, 2010, you could just feel all the life get sucked out of that and move over to Twitter, and all your sources and all your colleagues and all the subject of your coverage and all the insane people who screamed at you were all over there now. And the fun thing as a journalist was to break news and see people share it and see people react to it on social media. And so when Jonah Peretti approached me with the and meanwhile having the blog was like feeding the beast. Like we need a story for page B7 was like that kind of feeling. And so when Jonah Peretti approached me with what was then as now this incredible kind of like web culture kaleidoscope with lists and quizzes, or not quizzes yet, quizzes came later, but lists and animals and all sorts of stuff. I had no idea what he was talking about. Like, why would he want to bolt a news organization out of this thing? But the core insight that he had and that he persuaded me of, way before anybody else, was that the way information was going to travel online was people were going to share it. And the goal of a media company was not to build, or not solely to build a destination that people would arrive at, but also to but really primarily to make media that people would share. And they were thinking about Facebook and at the time Stumble Upon and a different set of Twitter, social media platforms where people shared heartwarming, entertaining content. I was thinking entirely about Twitter, and I'm a reporter. I was not thinking in an abstract media philosophy
but Ben, that's the point. You were a serious journalist. People knew you at Politico and before that as a serious journalist. And the idea of you grafting your serious journalist guy persona onto BuzzFeed was for a lot of people kind of like a...
And what we had in common was the idea of an audience who didn't go to www.yourwebsite.com, but who went to Facebook or Twitter or somewhere.
So that's the concept of social news.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the concept is now totally banal, that like, hey, these social platforms may be onto something. They're going to get pretty big.
When you start something, you think... I mean, I'm going to just say this in my own instance, and I think there's probably some universality to this, that when you start something, you think you know everything, and then 5 minutes later, you realize that you know nothing. And at the beginning of this, you probably had an idea of what this would be, and then very quickly realized, actually, it's probably something else. So what was the biggest assumption you made at the beginning going in that turned out not to be true?
Gosh, I don't know. I think I'm pretty simple. I assumed that scoops would... That breaking news has a lot of currency, and it has continued to.
Yeah.
I did...
That's borne out.
Yeah, I guess, one assumption that I was wrong about is I always liked the sort of quality of, well, everything is mashed up together. You've got news, you've got entertainment. If you don't like it, like, sorry, screw you, that's the future.
Right.
And kind of took a certain perverse satisfaction.
So this is the goulash theory of journalism, everything in one pot.
And took a sort of perverse satisfaction in having people who just hated the whole idea of BuzzFeed have to come there because we broke news.
Because you broke news.
Right. I think that I was wrong about that, actually, and that like and my colleague Shani Hilton eventually persuaded me that, that the audience wanted signals about what was what, that we should be branding news much, much more clearly, that we should, that a kind of polish and copy editing. I had initially said my initial line. It really held out for a while on the point of view that Twitter's your copy editor. It's great if you have a typo. Somebody tweets at you, "Hey moron, you have a typo," and you fix it.
And you fix it.
And it's free.
Free copy editing.
Yeah, it's amazing. But
it's also free fact checking, by the way.
Yes, I know, and I've always been grateful for that. And so I held out for a while on that point, but but that there's a kind of authority and competence that you want to assert with news that requires a certain level of polish and professionalism, and so that I come from a source. I had a lot of news reporters come out of a more kind of guerrilla approach to the world, and so I think that also the success of long narrative journalism, big investigations in that environment. Partly that do need a level of rigor and polish, but also in this increasingly crowded environment where there's not that many stories each day are going to punch through, that it often is the biggest one.
Well, that's the counterintuitive aspect of this.
Yeah.
How many years were all of us told you can't do long form on the web, right?
It turns out that's the only thing you can do.
It turns out you can do it, and it turns out that it can be that much more impactful. And in the same way that there are only a handful of magazines that commit to that, and they say, look, if we give it to people and we invest in them and we trust their intelligence and their bandwidth, they're going to stay with us. Same online.
Yeah.
Right? I wonder if the algorithmic Armageddon that we're seeing now on the social platforms is problematic for a news organization predicated, as you say, on the idea of social news. So, Facebook has screwed with all of us in the sense that the algorithm changes and changes and changes, and they've got their own dumpster fires to put out as well. And all of us who rely on our audience being built partly on the backs of other organizations are realizing that our fates are tied to those other organizations. Yeah. How problematic has that been for you?
It's obviously been this roller coaster for the industry.
Right.
I think we've always been probably the news organization most aligned with the platforms, the one... and I think it's partly because we never saw it as a technical challenge. We didn't see it as like, how can we game them? How can we write headlines that are, that are following a set of best practices most heavily torqued toward getting people to click?
Yeah.
But, like, I think our goal has always been to try to align with their audiences on the theory that people running these companies are smart. They are trying to serve their audiences well.
You still think that?
Yes.
That the people who run these companies are smart?
I do think the people who run I mean, I think, obviously they've made mistakes and they're having a tough time, but also they've succeeded because they're serving their audience as well.
Yep.
And so our goal has always been to kind of align with what their audiences want rather than what the platforms want or the algorithm wants today.
Yep.
And I think that's kept us from the sort of spikiness of, oh, we figured out this new kind of head. Like, we never did I don't know if people remember the Curiosity Gap headline. You won't believe what happens next.
Oh, we remember.
Which was like a particular form of like obvious spam that was gaming Facebook's algorithms.
It's like there was a joke that we were in on, right? Yeah.
Right, yeah, but we never did that because our view was like, obviously this is terrible, and Facebook at some point is going to kill it. So let's not expose ourselves to that.
Right.
Because it wasn't serving their audience, and so yeah. So we now do a lot of different things, which I think has kind of leveled out the spikiness. We also have seen a lot of success on platforms other than Facebook. Twitter has been really.
I was going to ask you to kind of rank in some back-of-the-envelope hierarchy. If you look at the platforms that have been integral to the success of BuzzFeed, sort of give me your put your top three together.
I mean, I can't rank them. I think that Facebook has a kind of scale that and broad reach that is totally unique. And we've enjoyed, a lot of news organizations felt burned by this. We've enjoyed experimenting with like live video. We build a lot of muscles on their live video platform.
Yep.
YouTube has been a huge platform for us. It's just, you can do a lot. There's a lot of good journalism, a lot of good entertainment going on there.
Yeah.
And then, Twitter is like, I love Twitter. Twitter's the beating heart of news. It's obviously smaller.
Is Twitter for us or is Twitter for them? I think of Twitter often as relevant, except when I stop for a second and realize that the only people I'm talking to on Twitter are basically, in the most broadly defined sense, my friends.
The people you're talking to are the people who are likely to care most and be most sophisticated about your work.
But is Twitter really an audience development or engagement or generation? Is it audience lead gen, really? Or is Twitter more for us?
Are we like viral marketers? I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm talking to the editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed.
Yeah, no.
Oh, yes, we're viral marketers.
Yes, Twitter, yeah. Twitter's, we see Twitter as a way to reach people. Like, we have a morning show on Twitter.
Right.
AM to DM. Airs at, I guess, probably 9 a.m. here, which is a slightly more normal morning time, that you should watch. And that is, we get, at times, 1 million people tune in the morning. That's a lot of people. There's a lot of people on Twitter. I mean, you get used to the scale of Facebook, and it is not at the scale of Facebook, but it's also an audience that is more likely to be interested in news, which is broadly always a minority of people.
Right.
And there's a sophisticated inside conversation that your audience is in on. They're in on the joke, and that allows you to have a more sophisticated conversation in a certain way.
And
that's really satisfying.
And the size of an audience that would be in on the joke, as you say, is large enough to justify the effort that you're putting into it, clearly.
I mean, we've built a really good business there. Our advertisers think so.
Well, let's talk about that. So I've got you here and not Jonah. But I also understand that in the contemporary universe, the editor-in-chief of any news organization has got to be sophisticated about the business. There might have been once upon a time when you only focused on the content, but now you've got to be a business person as well as an editorial person. So I want to ask you about the business of the business. How have the economics of BuzzFeed over the years you've been there morphed? And what can you tell us about the economics of it now relative to the times we're in? There's a sense out there that there may be a divot in the digital media economics universe now.
Oh yeah, I mean, our logo, if you've seen, is that arrow, that kind of viral arrow, and you'll note that it's not a straight line.
Is that how we're supposed to interpret the economic fortunes of BuzzFeed if the arrow changes?
I mean, I think any growth, any startup is not totally linear. I mean, we've changed and matured a ton as a business, and I initially really had nothing to do with the business because we were in one business, which was selling branded content, and to like Jonah's great credit, I was never, the news organization never touched the branded content. Actually, it's now that division now run by a very brilliant ad creative here in Austin named Summer Ann Burton. If any of you are, get sick of journalism, but I think if you actually look at the mature media business of the 20th century, 21st century, what you find is not companies that have figured out one trick. but companies that have 7 or 8 revenue streams, and it's not the most glamorous thing in the world, actually. But it is, and it's a messier story. But you know, if you'd asked me 3 or 4 years ago, I said, yeah, we have probably 97% of our revenue is branded content, is advertising. That's still our biggest business, but we're now, you know, we now have programmatic advertising. We do straightforward production deals.
Yep.
We do a lot of commerce. You know, there's like kind of a long list of businesses that we're, you know, focused on operating pretty well and that are maturing. This form, I mean, the kind of television advertising that we're doing in AM to DM is pretty interesting.
What percentage of the, this may be an impossible question for you to answer, but what percentage of the money that comes in the door because of the hard journalism that you do at BuzzFeed?
That's a really, I mean, that is a question that is hard to answer. I mean, I think, you know, because I think people often in digital media take traffic as a proxy for success and revenue, which is obviously false. Like if you look at the companies that were maybe our comps when I started, whether it would be like Upworthy or Distractify, they largely, some degree no longer, Break.com, if anyone remembers that had a lot of traffic, but didn't do news and had no real voice in the culture. They mostly don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And if you look at great media companies from the 20th century, they mostly all had great news divisions. So I both think, I think.
But the great media companies of the 20th century that had great news divisions, the great news divisions were not the money maker; they were the money loser.
That's, you know, I think that has sort of become a cliche for some reason.
You don't think it's right?
I don't think that's true. No, I mean, I don't think it's like a weird coincidence that CBS, ABC, and NBC, these great, incredibly lucrative media companies, just like weirdly happen to have news divisions that they subsidized. So I guess I think 2 things. I think news is a better business than people realize. Like I think the Post is showing this right now.
Yeah.
But I think if you really focus on it, there's a huge appetite in America right now for this extremely valuable and hard to produce thing.
Right now.
There aren't that many people doing well, and that we've found across our businesses, there's a huge appetite for news. And also, and this is a little harder to put your finger on, but my boss at some point said, you know, knew that news is the soul of a media company. And you can just, you know, it's a little hard to explain, but when you walk around the building, it is obvious that it is crucial to who we are, that we're doing this work.
So if you can't tell me what the percentage of the overall revenue that comes in the door.
I actually probably wouldn't tell you if I could. So,
why not?
That's one of these features of business.
Do you think I'm going to be satisfied with that answer? I'm not satisfied with that answer.
I know.
Then tell me what the percentage of the spend is. In other words, what is your budget? Give me a sense of how much you spend on
Yeah, I think, see, this is the boring part of this whole being familiar with business.
Me?
I'm just not going
to. Why the hell do you think people are up at 9 in the morning?
I'm just not going to rattle off budget numbers.
Yeah, you can't even give us an estimate of what you spend every year. Why not?
You know, maybe I'm too inexperienced a business guy to feel comfortable doing that. But
that is such a. Would you accept that answer from somebody you were interviewing? Come on, that's a total dodge.
You know, it's an underestimated tactic in interviews, just to like flatly refuse to answer questions.
It is. Well, okay. I'll note that.
But I've found that. It's effective.
Right. Yeah. Well, the interview's not over yet, so we'll see. So before we go to audience questions, because already we're out of time, what is going to happen next? What's the next upturning of the apple cart that you all are going to do? I mean, I think that's interesting because in some ways you guys came into existence to upturn the apple cart, and you've become the apple cart, haven't you?
Yeah, it's a weird world.
It
right?
is.
Yeah.
How do you upturn the apple cart again? What's the next thing?
I think that there's a huge amount of opportunity in doing, you know, what used to be called kind of like streaming video, but I really think of it as broadcast. I mean, I think you have to do it well. You're competing with great broadcast outlets, but whose audiences tend to be in their 60s and 70s. And there's a huge opening, I think, for what we're doing on Twitter, and we have some other projects in the works, you know, where you're doing really high quality broadcast that's made for a mobile phone, and also speaking to an audience like under, say, 50.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like the people, it's easy to underestimate. It's crazy to look at the demographics of the big broadcasters and think about where the opportunities are to speak in a language and about topics that interest people who are, and I love people like use the word millennial to mean like young child, basically. But, you know, we're talking like Congress people and lawyers and doctors.
Exactly.
So
the generational theory of audience is one that you generally embrace, which is, you know, over time, this will all be taken care of.
I don't know. I just think there's a big opportunity to do, but, you know, the expectation of any kind of, you know, of broadcast content online is not being set by somebody live streaming on Periscope unless they happen to be at a news event. It's being set by Game of Thrones. And so there's an expectation that it's that it's high quality, that it's well produced, that it's not wasting your time.
Yeah.
And then I think if you have a great news organization, if you're breaking stories, you have incredible journalists, there's a real opportunity to do that.
So one last thing. So the idea that somehow, we talk about streaming video, but it's really just broadcasting. In some ways, you're reverse engineering and going back to the future. Should there be a BuzzFeed channel, like television network? Are you going to begin to appropriate the tools
probably not on linear
of old media to bring this stuff forward?
I mean, probably not on linear television, right? Like, I think there had been this idea over the last several years that, like, take your new media internet brand, and I'm not going to say never because this world keeps changing, and I think there were people like me were making predictions about like the collapse of TV that turned out to be totally wrong. Like the thought that the broadcast business would go the way of the newspaper business and really start to see the floor fall out a couple years ago. That didn't happen. But there's also been this impulse of like, oh, could we take like the name of a digital brand and kind of like sprinkle it on a linear television station, and then like the millennials will flock back to cable and find channel 721 and tune into it. And no, that is not. I find that hard to believe.
It's less about brand than about consumption habits, right?
Yeah. So that means you want to be where people are.
Right. All right. So we have like 10 minutes. We'll do questions from the left and the right microphones, and we'll go back, forth. Start here, ma'am.
Hi. Hi. I'm Rosa Jimenez from El País, from Spain. And for a long time, newspapers have been struggling in Spain to get more readers and to get more sales. So one of those marketing strategies, it was selling people pans with a newspaper, like giving away the pan and making them by the newspaper. As I'm kind of a disaster on kitchen and many other fields, I bought your one-top stove, $200. I like this experience, but to me it was strange that you were selling kind of a hardware with an app and IoT things and a different kind of experience. So can you tell us how that impacts journalism and what's your approach to selling stoves for $200?
Sure. Yeah, and there's a table set up outside where I'm selling stoves after this after this event. No, we're a media company. We do a lot of things. Tasty, which is this food brand that actually was created by one of our food journal, a great food writer, Emily Fleischaker, this format, but then quickly developed by our video team in LA into this really massive online brand called Tasty. Has hundreds of millions of people a month kind of engaging it.
And lots of offshoots, right, too?
Yeah, and lots of offshoots, but is run, I think, if you think about, a big television network, they may have a food channel and also a news channel, and the food, it's that separate. I think we're a media company that does, I think people are often surprised to learn. I think it's understandable, the world changes so fast, and people think, oh, BuzzFeed's this website. And in fact, in some sense, there are elements that are more like a traditional media company that does some very different things in different lanes. And I would love to find some way to either claim credit for or replicate the success of our food people in selling stoves, but I have not really figured out the news equivalent of that.
Sir.
Christian McDonald, I'm a data editor here at the Statesman and a professor here at UT. You've brought together a collection of journalists, data journalists like Peter Aldis and Jeremy Singer-Vine and Scott Pham that bring a rigor to their data analysis. They script it, they publish it, it's repeatable, it's very authentic and transparent. Is that something that has come from the top down, that you want to bring that kind of rigor to those kinds of analysis and news stories? Or is that just that stable of journalists trying to bring that from the bottom up to say, hey, we're gonna make our reporting as transparent as possible?
I wish I could tell you that I'd come in with like a strong philosophy of data journalism. No, I think they kind of persuaded me that that's a really important value and is in some sense the parallel in data journalism of what we try to do in general, which is to report in public to the degree we can. I think right in this particular moment, when there's this huge crisis around trust, there's sort of two ways that you can go about trying to get people to trust you. One is to up the theater, to sort of mystify it and make yourself seem like you have special knowledge and special motion graphics, and if you're cable news, and that there's a kind of like, to sort of try to reassert this sense that journalists are a high priesthood with special access to privileged information. Or you can realize that people are watching you in real time stumble through the not always particularly glamorous or impressive process of reporting, but that you're doing it in public, that they can see you doing it, that they can replicate it.
Right.
And data is this very pure version of that, where you can really replicate it.
Isn't this really stay with that for a second. So this is the sort of fourth grade math class, show your work theory of journalism, right? That they don't want to just see the answer, they want to see how you got to the answer. And sometimes the journalism you produce is, we didn't get to the answer, but here was the road we traveled to try to get to the answer.
Yeah, I mean, Julia Yaffe had this great line that, that there's the tradition of, the priest like behind the golden iconstasis,
yeah.
And then there's the Protestant tradition where everybody gets.
In that respect, the David Farenthold Big Chief tablet from Twitter is kind of the emblem of this.
Totally.
Is like the emblem of this theory of show your work that has motivated all of us to understand that getting people to trust us in part requires us to show them process.
And there are times like as when David did it, that can really be dramatic and fun and compelling to see the process. There are also times when it's a boring mess to see the process. And in fact, like, it's not like the GitHub posts of our data journalism are not massive traffic drivers, but I think it's an important principle.
But they're there if anybody wants to see them. Ma'am.
Katie Camp, Cox Media Group, Orlando. You kind of danced around this with getting into broadcast, but my question is, in terms of millennials and broadcast, Scripps is doing that with Newsy and putting it back on basic cable, or putting it on basic cable. John Steinberg's peddling cheddar around to every major broadcast company right now. So for BuzzFeed, what are you guys doing about OTT or getting on YouTube Live or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're doing quite a bit of it, and I think as somebody who came out of newspapers, I think there's always a little bit of like a mutual dismissiveness between print reporters and TV reporters, and I think sometimes like kind of a blitheness about what it takes to produce a good television broadcast. Oh yeah, well, we can just point a camera at a reporter, he'll be fine, and like obviously no, and so we've been doing more and more OTT stuff. Yeah, we're producing an hour of live TV every weekday morning. We're doing live election night shows, often quite long ones that are really excellent with these folks at Decision Desk HQ who are gathering a parallel stream of data to the AP and doing both the sort of data and the analysis in a very transparent, open, fast way, getting a really big audience, and we're broadcasting that on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter.
And by the way, you don't have to have 200 million monthly unique visitors to be able to produce an election night program, right? I mean, that's something that small news organizations have the capacity and the technology to do as well.
Yeah, that's right. Although I guess we've definitely found that like you need to be able to have really high quality data coming fast, streaming onto the screen, which isn't totally trivial. Like I think that I would say I at least underestimated the production challenges, and we brought in this great woman named Cindy Venegas who had been at Fox and at CNN and HuffPost and really like changed our approach to production recently.
So production values actually, at the end of the day, those production values actually matter.
Yeah, yes. It's like everything else, incredibly competitive landscape.
Right. Rosenthal is giving us the hook,
all right.
Which is unfortunate. Please give Ben Smith a big hand. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Good job, man.
Thanks.
Painless.
That was fun.
Painless.
Absolutely. Almost.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Okay, so we have no break, so stay where you are. Don't move. And I'm going to call Mia Trumps to lead the next panel. The next panel is about what's next. So let's rock and roll. Mia, you can introduce one by one. Thank you. Wonderful. Yes.
Mic on? Not yet. Okay.
No.
Wanted to say hi before we start. I'm Mia. Nice to meet you. I'm Deborah. Hi, Mia.
Jared Dicker.
Nice to meet you. Hi, Deborah. My mic on? Hello? Hello? It is? Hey, everybody. Hello? Can you all hear me? Yeah? Okay, so we're going to kick off our next panel called What's Next? We're going to be talking about all new technologies from blockchain to machine learning AI, VR, AR, all the R's. And we have some wonderful panelists who will join me shortly that you'll see presentations from. My name's Mia Trams. When I was asked to do this panel, I had a different title than I have now. Started a new job about a week and a half ago. So currently, I'm the editorial director of Enterprise and Immersive Experiences at Time. For the last 2.5 years, I was managing editor of Life VR, which was Time Inc., now Meredith's company-wide VR and AR initiative. I got to produce and develop VR and AR experiences for all of our brands and launch those capabilities for the company. So I'll tell you a little bit about that today, and then each of our panelists will tell you about what they're doing before we jump into the panel itself. It's okay. Okay, so our first panelist is going to be Deborah Baskin. Deborah, if you want to come on down. She's working in using VR as a creative tool at NBC's Left Field. Do I get a... How do I do... Do I just take this one? And that's next, to the right. Yeah. Okay. So I guess while we're waiting for that to show up, hello, my name's Deborah Baskin. I'm a producer at NBC Left Field. And once this shows up, I don't know if it's going to happen. I'll be talking about a project I'm working on with a colleague of mine called Owen Rich. And the two of us have been working in the realm of VR, AR, and MR, and all the R's, as we were saying. Is that going to... Okay. Super exciting. What's next? Yeah, okay. So this is us. Those are our Twitter handles. And what I'll do today is I thought I'd start off by talking a little bit about the project we're doing. I'm not going to assume everyone's seen what we're up to. And then talk a bit about what we were thinking when we did it, what we've been thinking since, and where that might go in the future. So hopefully that leads into the what's next kind of question. So as I said before I start explaining anything, I thought I'd show a few clips from some of the episodes we've been making. So they're all short features. They're about between 2 and 3 minutes long. And here is a little bunch of clips.
And contrary to popular belief, it's not the words love, sex, secret, or God that are getting us into trouble. This other spike is in the 60s when all the baby boomers, the kids born from these weddings, actually came of age and started to marry each other.
There are 127,000 hours of sports to watch.
At the end of the day, for every 100 people who make them, ultimately, only 9% of people are going to keep them. There are a lot of factors which feed into sports improvement, whether it's increased fitness or advances in medicine or doping.
Overwhelmingly, love is the main reason people get married.
So that's some of what we... Oh, thanks. So that's some of what we've been working on. I think the most mixed part of that reality was me talking about sports. What you can see is it's animated, it's fun. We're using data, it kind of lends itself to data visualization and to sort of speaking to...
And contrary to popular belief, it's not the words love, sex, secret, or...
Right. And so as we were kind of working through how this whole process was going to work and how we were going to think about it, I keep coming back to the fact that it's a bit like the sort of bizarre love child of Hans Rosling and Picasso's light paintings. And so that's what we're keeping in our minds as we go along, the fun that we can have with it. So mixed reality, okay, there's lots of blurry lines between all the kinds of realities. But mixed reality, often when we hear it, we think of something like this. And it's huge and it's really interesting. People are kind of sort of displaying their live gameplay. So in an image like this, you've got about 80% is the virtual world and about 20% is the real person world. And we've decided to kind of flip that on its head. And so that's what you've seen in our clips. This is how we do it. I could spend 4 hours on this, and Owen could spend maybe 3 to 4 years talking about the rig that we built and the way that, that it's running. But I will kind of summarize and say this is our setup, and what we're doing is we're taking the virtual reality, the drawing, the drawings that I'm doing, and live compositing at the same time with the real reality that we're filming. So what's being spat out at the end is actually a finished product. It takes virtually no post-production. We're not using any graphics or anything else. And here's a shot of Owen as he's filming me. We're using a glide cam as part of our rig. And you can see behind him is a monitor, which is showing both the drawings as well as the real world that we're filming at the same time. So how we came to think of it. So we were talking about VR a lot, and Owen and I come from an innovation background as well, but we've also always primarily been program makers. So we were quite keen to make something that we could use immediately, sort of that instant gratification of being able to be producers and to be journalists. And he'd worked previously, and I'd been near it, on a piece for virtual reality as a platform. So he made a piece called Trafficked. It's excellent. I advise everyone to go check it out. But this is very much creating a piece for VR as a platform. So this involved using a game engine, modeling, graphics, a bunch of other people, and huge sort of production line. I mean, it was a small team, but it takes a long time to make. And we flipped that again, and we are now using, instead of making something for VR as a platform, we're using VR as a tool. So what we're using is Google Tilt Brush, which is a totally commercially available product that anybody can have if they've got the setup. And we're bending it, and there's a lot of bending, we're bending it to our use to tell stories. Ultimately, we just like to connect with audiences in new and innovative ways. So the moment this presented itself as something we could do after lots of tinkering and trying and innovating, this is what we've come to. So again, it's just distinguishing massively between making something for VR, which will be seen by people with VR headsets, and using VR as a tool to actually essentially make quite a traditional piece of broadcast, which is video, which is where we come from. This is where we took it outside, and I left my soul on that shoot. And so to talk about what we found as we've been going along, the process itself is quick and nimble, and we believe that the result is direct, authentic, and hopefully a bit disruptive. So to explain a little bit about what I mean by each of those. So we're working on a schedule of about 5 to 7 working days between having an idea, scripting it up like this, shot listing, well, research, writing, shot listing, filming, editing, grading, putting the sound in, and delivering within 5 to 7 working days. Which, when you think of, you know, some video, that's either very long or very short, depending on the quality and what you're trying to achieve. And of course, I think like goldfish in a tank, they tend to grow and shrink to the time that you're given. But we think that's pretty cool for 2.5 to 3 minutes. So we're going from something like this, the script, some images, some ideas, to something like this, what we're making, what we're drawing, and trying to do it within 5 to 7 working days. When I talk about being nimble, I was going to say agile, and then I realized that was going to send everyone frantic. So it's not agile, nimble. This is the team. That's me and Owen working hard. And I have huge respect for news graphics, for data teams, and all of those things. But this is another way of making a product that is that avoids kind of workflows and snarl-ups that you might have. So if you're left with 2 people in a room, this is the kind of thing that you can create. So that's what we mean by a bit nimble. When we're talking about direct, and it's really bizarre to be that tall, when we're talking about direct, because of what we've shot and the way that we're doing it, there is a seamless integration between the presenter and what they're presenting. So there's nothing too artificial. I'm definitely talking to those graphics, to those things that I've drawn. And I think that that comes across as quite engaging for an audience. Which leads me into the next thing, which is this buzzword of authenticity. Everybody wants something authentic, and bizarrely, in this way, you kind of get it. No matter who the presenter is, they are the art director. This is my terrible handwriting, and these are my drawings. And thinking about how this might sort of expand outwards, whoever presents is going to put their authentic stamp on it and speak to their own work. So there is that immediacy, which obviously does very well on sort of social platforms and online, but is also just engaging, I think, for a lot of audiences in general. And when we talk about being disruptive, this is just a screen grab. We come from a broadcast media background, so we know that people are quite blasé about the tropes of news, and news video in particular. So, you know, anything you can do to kind of wake people up and sort of shake them a little and get information in a new way, we think is quite hopefully quite attention-grabbing. And, you know, strays from being a gimmick. We're very committed to the actual journalism of getting a message across and being able to explain things in new ways. So a lot of what I keep saying, and somebody actually mentioned it earlier, is we think this lends itself to a kind of back-of-the-napkin explainer, that moment when you're in the pub or bar, and your friend wants to explain something and is getting frustrated and eventually takes a napkin out and draws it with a pen. That's kind of where we're sitting and where we hope a lot of people will start to engage with us. So, thinking about the future, of course, I've mentioned news graphics before, and I love news graphics teams, and they do amazing stuff. But we can also think about how this might be used in a news sort of storytelling way, perhaps even for live television. We have used it in a live setting. Of course, it lends itself to explainers. That's what we were talking about, back of the napkin. And we've been approached by people from the worlds of science and education who see huge scope for its use there. And of course, politics. We were talking about speed and getting to have that information quick. This is it takes a huge amount of work to get up and running and to work out how to do it. And I'd be happy to go into that. But it's ultimately something that can be quite quick to create and quite quick to broadcast. So that works for the immediacy. And then future thinking for the workflow, it does speed it up if you're a team of 2. Again, that depends on what you would like to create. But for the skills you need, this is quite interesting. I have absolutely no artistic capabilities whatsoever, but the tool itself is really fun to pick up and play with. And the moment you start having fun and the moment you start bending your mind to what it can and can't do, the sky's the limit. And thinking about how it might be used actually sort of from a sort of creation side, there is at the moment, if you walk into a newsroom or to a 3D sort of graphics department, there'll be people sort of moving 3D models around on a 2D screen. Whereas actually using the Google Tilt Brush or using a headset like this might allow you to draw and create these things in 3 dimensions. So you might walk into a newsroom and see a bunch of people standing in rows kind of moving around like this and creating assets for future use. So essentially, just to wrap it all up, we've been working this out. We've spent a lot of time figuring out what it can and it can't do. But the key takeaways, I think, are using VR as a tool as opposed to making something for VR as a platform. And the sky's the limit. We've taken a consumer tool, a consumer product, and made it work for us, but still with a commitment to journalism and explaining things. Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Jared Dicker, CEO of Poet, a new blockchain company.
Hey everyone, I'm the one who gets to talk about blockchain, so how lucky am I? But anyway, I did come from the Post, where I spent the past 3 years, so it was a very difficult place to leave. But I start with that because what we're doing and what I aim to focus on at Poet is very aligned with the ideation and ideologies that I focus on at the Post. So I work on the business side of media. Prior to the Post, I was at the Huffington Post and Time Inc. and others with a strong focus on how to be directive. I think we constantly are running uphill in the business of media, whether that's ad blocking, fraud, viewability, right? A lot of negative connotations associated with it. And I think that's because we're extremely reactive as a business, right? We're trying to see what the platforms will do. We're trying to see what advertisers are asking for, instead of being more directive, right? And investing in things like technology and other efforts that help clients, consumers, readers get from A to B faster. So I took that here, and I always start with Paul Ford's article, who's a friend, but this came out like 2 days after I decided to go to Poet. So, and the title is Bitcoin is Ridiculous and Blockchain is Dangerous. And Paul writes amazing articles around technology, and I think that it's extremely important for a lot of perceptions like this to come out, because you have a lot of arguments today, right? You you have like the rowdy and the dowdy when it comes to blockchain. People that say blockchain is going to change the world. If you're not on board, you don't know what's going on. And then there's people that are like, I can't stand this. I want nothing to do with this. And I think that it's important to also understand that people think that an argument is to separate, right, Bitcoin and currencies and blockchain. And say one is different than the other. But the idea of this like cultural shift and what's happening with the economics, it's important to realize that they actually do go hand in hand. And there is a question that many companies should ask themselves, which is like, why use the blockchain versus using a database? And are people like the Long Island Iced Tea Company just using blockchain to increase stock price? And I think you're seeing a lot of that right now. And unfortunately, it puts a damper on all the exciting things that are happening here. But within Paul's article, he said, what if the most important thing the blockchain offers is a way to really build culture? And that, I think, is extremely important in this space, right? Blockchain is coming. It's an exciting technology, as you know, the cryptocurrency market as well. It's been around for 9 years now, so no one could say that they're an expert on blockchain and has worked in it for a decade, because no one has, right? It's only been 9 years. But I think what's extremely important is for us to be prepared, especially in media. That's why, again, I'm at Poet and what we're focusing on, right? I don't think new technologies will do old technologies better than those old technologies. But that's why they're old, right? In 1993, when the internet was coming and people would say, but I rather use the fax machine, it is better at communicating messages, that was true. But not investing in the internet and being prepared for the economic shift that it brought every single pocket of industry wasn't the best idea for many businesses that no longer exist here. So that's where I think blockchain is extremely interesting, right? If we could start building on protocols, right, and this next layer of internet, focusing on things particularly to media that are extremely important, then what we're able to do at Poet and other companies in this vein are able to work with media companies, advertisers, and others in the space to help them when they're ready to start embracing this technology. So I always like to listen, and I was convinced, right, and similar to my previous jobs, that everyone in media was saying, the platforms are eating our business, the bundling models are going to overbundle, advertising is struggling, so I said, okay, this is going to solve it. And then, of course, everyone is like, Poet is a solution in search of a problem, right? And I think that many great ideas start that way. You know, I think like a solution in search of a problem actually does eventually create a solution. And especially within media, there's like two things that are extremely important to realize, is that attribution in media is a real problem, right? When it comes to being able to identify news and information and be able to store it and archive in an immutable ledger, right? Early days of the internet, the idea was that your information and your storage cannot be impacted by any outside source. And now, with centralization and cloud computing, like there are data centers and there are pieces of information that if they did go away, you would lose that, right? So the idea of attribution and how that works is important. And then being able to take that data and understand what the value of media should be, right? Like I, for one, believe that media is extremely underpriced. However, it's very hard for us to really figure out what that is. There's no free agency market like in sports to be able to dictate how much content and how much the value of an effort of work should cost. And what if blockchain could be a solution to help for that? So there's kind of three questions that at Poet we look to answer, right? Like who owns digital media? Who owns the digital media assets? How do you license and syndicate it, right? Like how do you get your content out there in an intelligent way so that it can't be copied, so that it can't be stolen? When I say content, I mean ideas, right? It's not just articles or videos or images, but it's when you press save on PowerPoint or Photoshop. How do you enable that art? And what is the origin of this asset, right? Like, do you want to get to the source, especially as it pertains to this conversation? How do you source, how do you push out bad actors, and how do you leverage, you know, a decentralized community to help find the truth? So attribution is a product that we're focusing on now. So to be clear, Poet is an open source protocol. So it's a nonprofit business. We have to date, we just hired, but we have about 10 engineers. in the blockchain stack. So if you think there's probably 1,000 engineers that work in blockchain around the world, and every single company is jumping on them with their 1 or 2 years of experience. So that's where we see a huge value in what we're going to be doing here when it comes to media companies and publishers, is that we're focusing on this and then trying to bring it to the masses to be able to learn and evolve from. So today there's certain companies that are working with us that are just timestamping and putting metadata ownership of their content on their site. So whenever they press publish, whenever they press save, we scrape the metadata, we timestamp it, and it's stored on the block. It's immutable, it's there, it cannot be changed. And the value of that is that it's really the future of what the archive looks like. Here you're able to edit, you're able to send licenses. So say if the New York Times has a partnership with Medium and Hearst, right now they're probably signing contracts and deals and taking a huge leap of faith that the rules will be followed. This sort of technology allows you to say, well, if A doesn't equal B, then it will not work. And then we're building this. I'm extremely ambitious to say we're building the future of the internet, but I really believe that we're building something that is going to help make the internet better, especially in the media space. And especially when it understands what could be built on top of this, right? So being an open source protocol, we are building tools that are helping different pockets of business, leveraging blockchain for storage and immutability, but also for discovery. Really figuring out, what do these tokens mean, right? When people are buying cryptocurrency assets, how can you be a subscriber to multiple publications, right, without having to go to each one? And how do we recognize those users throughout their entire journey? And that's something that, again, blockchain is bringing value to here. And another thing that I think is important, and it's a big theme here, is the idea of content being discovered. And I love the sentiments lately that we can't really value content based on visits, UVs, PVs, because that kind of propagates a bad business and advertising economy, that we're really looking at the wrong things when we should be focused on others. And I think that the word discovery is a clear indicator of that, right? When we think of discovery, we think about how to get a piece of information or content in front of the most people possible, because we feel that the reward is to get that group of people back consuming our content. And I think that discovery is a bigger issue, like thinking outside of our bubble and circles. People have ideas. Screenwriters are creating like movie scripts that they want to syndicate and share around, but are scared that if someone sees it, they will copy it, right? And that sort of idea of people creating ideas and creating information keeps them from putting that art and that information out there. So what we're looking to do with Discovery 2 is giving people faith and opportunity to know that they could put their work out there and then be able to know that it's safe, right? And there's an origin of truth. So we have different applications that allow other publishers to do this. And we're also building out these marketplaces. So the other value of blockchain and what's really happening here is the decentralization of having many different players come in and be able to weigh in on a source of information. So building reputation systems, building governance, but really being able to take advantage of what all these things could do. And again, not saying that blockchain today is the solution for all. But again, going full circle, similar to Internet in '93, if we're focusing on these things and preparing for them and building on top of them, then these code libraries and opportunities will be available for everyone in this room to be ready, right, when this wave comes, and react accordingly to help better your business, better your community, and better the overall media ecosystem. So with that, what's next? And I will say blockchain in media. So thank you.
Next up, we have Zach Seward, who is the Chief Product Officer and Executive Editor at Quartz.
Yeah. If we define augmented reality as simply the combination of physical and digital worlds, then I think you could argue that the first major experiment in AR for journalism was the infamous QCat, circa 2000. The device that allowed users to scan a barcode in publications like Fortune, Wired, the Dallas Morning News, and get contextual information related to what they were scanning on the internet. course, it required having this ridiculous-looking device in the first place, reading the print publication while seated next to your desktop computer, and then, frankly, when you did all of that, the information you got wasn't particularly worth the trouble you'd gone through. Flash forward another decade, we see further experiments in AR for news. This one from Esquire, they put a QR code on their cover, and all of a sudden Robert Downey Jr. is coming to life, though again, in front of your desktop computer and in a somewhat implausible scenario. Kind of a cooler, more interesting experiment, which the Rolex ad right there in the back sort of explains what was going on or why, what might have motivated that particular experiment, but not particularly practical nor particularly useful to the user. Flash forward another decade to today, and AR seems to be having yet another moment. We see a slew of AR apps come out in the last 6 to 12 months, and I'm here to argue that this time, the third go-around for AR, is for real. So before we go any further, it seems necessary to just define some terms, explain what I'm even talking about in the first place. It helps to draw a spectrum. So you've got a real environment on the left and an entirely virtual environment on the right. As Deborah was explaining, some people just use the term mixed reality to speak to everything in between the two poles. But closer to the right side of the spectrum is what we typically refer to as virtual reality, and those are the extremely immersive, amazing experiences that require, again, putting on a fairly inaccessible piece of equipment to view. Toward the left side is AR, and though the experiences often fall short of what's possible further to the right of on this spectrum, experiencing it merely requires the phone that's already in your pocket. And that, in a nutshell, explains what I believe is like the real potential here and why this is the moment for AR in our industry and in others. It's really a confluence of three trends happening at the same time right now. So one is a transformation in how people communicate, from entirely text-based communication to one that's dominated by visuals, and not just any visuals, but ones that that users are really comfortable manipulating themselves. So I don't think people particularly think of Snapchat and Instagram lenses as AR, but that's exactly what they are. And I think at their core, those two apps and a lot of other messaging experiences are fundamentally AR apps being used in entirely mainstream ways. Second major trend is just advances just in the last 2 or 3 years in how computers see and are able to find planes and depth information on a flat image, sort of transforming what 2D experiences into 3D. That wasn't possible just 2 or 3 years ago. All of a sudden is very much possible and in most of the phones we have. And then the last is what I was saying earlier, that all of this technology has been bundled up and available now in most phones running iOS and Android. It really is this confluence of events in the last 6 to 9 months that have led to this moment for AR. It was kicked off in June of last year when Apple announced a new toolkit for developers in iOS 11 that suddenly made it way easier to create AR experiences in apps. Google followed quickly with their version of essentially the same thing. It's in Android 7, which is already in most high-end Android phones, coming soon to all Android phones. And between those two, you've got nearly 100% penetration of smartphones suddenly capable of really full-scale AR experiences in a way that wasn't possible before. And that helps explain why in quick succession, all of the major technology companies have released their version of an AR studio, allowing developers, creators to make AR experiences for those tech companies' own apps. At Quartz, we've always had a sort of hobbyist level interest in things like 3D modeling, 3D printing, 3D scanning, but it was just this kind of thing we did in the office for fun, not something that really applied to our journalism. with the release of ARKit, it seemed like an opportunity to meld that hobbyist level interest with the journalism we were doing. And you may know that we have had for 2 years an app for iOS and Android that tells the news in a conversational interface through a mix of text, emoji, GIFs, and static images. So the idea we had was, what if we just thought of 3D models as yet another media type that we could put into the mix of our storytelling when it seemed appropriate? So, for instance, when SpaceX had the inaugural launch of the Falcon Heavy, we were able to obtain a 3D model of the spacecraft itself. And it's the kind of story where you could try explaining in text to the reader, to the user, what's so special about the spacecraft. You could show the user a photograph of the spacecraft, or you could give the object itself to the user and let them place it in their physical environment, manipulate the object, literally walk around the object, and get just a far more helpful and explanatory experience of what's going on here, what's so different and cool about this particular spacecraft relative to others, for instance. So we don't do this every day, not even every week, and not in fact, most news items don't particularly lend themselves to being presented as a 3D model in an AR experience. But we found that some really do. So space does tend to be a theme here. This is the Cassini spacecraft that had orbited Saturn for several decades and was coming to the end of its run. It let users take a look at the spacecraft, see what it looks like at actual size, walk around it, have a real experience with the object. When the Rosetta Stone was suddenly back in the news because of a new research report, I let people place it directly on their desk. And the Berlin Wall, a news item we'd done about that, and this is perhaps my favorite example we've done because it really sort of explains why you might actually want to see something in 3D as opposed to a flat 2D image, where you're able to see both sides of the wall. And because this is such an amazing high-resolution scan of the wall, even just going up right into the nooks and crannies of it, gives you a view of the object that you wouldn't be able to get any other way. Some of the design challenges we faced when presenting this is not something that users are comfortable or used to finding in their apps today. So one challenge was simply how to explain what the hell was going on. Do we call it AR? Do we call it 3D? What sort of icon would explain that when you tap this, something else is going to happen, and you're going to have to, as a user, you're going to have to be doing you're going to take some actions in order to manipulate the object. We settled on the call to action, explore it in AR, to sort of suggest that the user would be in control and have more of an experience rather than just viewing an object. We also had to explain what the user needed to do, because they all of a sudden need to place the object in their environment, and placing something in AR requires finding like a flat surface. You can be holding the phone in the wrong way. We don't want this to all of a sudden feel like a laborious experience, but a fun one, because that the wow factor of AR sort of quickly wears off if you're sort of struggling to place the object in the first place, or don't have enough light in your environment to place the object at all. We also found that a really helpful affordance was to put the object in a translucent sort of ghost mode, hovering over where you might be placing it before you actually tapped to place the object. It helps the user figure out what exactly is going on and not lose their place when they're trying to view their actual reality in front of them, and then this augmented reality on the screen in their hand. We went through a whole host of options for what the actual AR viewer itself should look like. There's all sorts of things you can do once you've placed the object, but what we found was actually the better approach was to do as little as possible, or put as little as possible on the screen itself, and let the object shine above all. This was the first version that we shipped, and then a later version actually tried to strip away even more functionality. Although we did add one thing, you see in the bottom right-hand corner, a screenshot tool, because what we found even before that tool existed was that it turns out this is sort of an instinctually shareable experience. And so as we place these objects in the app, people would place them in unusual places where they were around the world, take a screenshot, share it on social media. This is a Tesla Model 3. You can't get one as they've rolled off the factory floor, but you can get one in the Quartz app. This is the Tesla in the Auckland airport. This is a Chevy Bolt owner. That's an actual Chevy Bolt in their driveway in the back, trying to test what another electric vehicle in the driveway would look like. We did a great story on the 808. There's the Rosetta Stone again, and this is that slice of the Berlin Wall, this time in Copenhagen. People asked for an archive, and so we gave it to them. Everything else in the app is ephemeral, but it did seem like the nature of these objects and the timeless nature of the news stories they were attached to befitted giving people a way to access them again. And so swiping over to the right of the main experience gets you the archive. It also made us focus for the first time on iPads, which are just about 10% of our active user base for the app, but a lot more important when you're talking about AR, because it's just a much better experience for AR with the larger the screen. And you can see Apple itself is emphasizing this. That's our app behind in the background at a recent Apple event, where they view part of the potential of iPad as a device is in AR. Other news organizations are doing pretty interesting stuff as well. The New York Times did an experience around the Olympics. The Washington Post did an AR game also around the Winter Olympics. USA Today recently released an AR-only app to do your own rocket launches. You might conclude from these examples and my own that space and sports lend themselves pretty well to AR, which is true, but I think more generally what's happening here is it takes a lot of time and preparation to do a 3D model for a story for stories like this, and so ones that you can plan for months ahead of time are just more natural fits than breaking news. Of course, they're not all great experiences or experiments we've seen thus far. This is a cryptocurrency app displaying market data for cryptocurrencies in AR. With machine learning, if they somehow fit machine learning in here, we would have all of the buzzwords on our panel. But this is like just the right combination of useless and annoying. And I think a good example, a good reminder that there'll be plenty more QCats before we really find like the perfect use cases for AR in news. Thanks.
Okay, please welcome Jeremy Merrill, who is a news app developer at ProPublica.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming out, and I wanted to thank Rosenthal and Mallory and the rest of the ISOJ team for organizing this great conference. So what I'm talking about today, what's next, is machine learning / AI. What we're going to talk about is like what the heck these things even are. Because like Zach was saying, it's a big buzzword. Everyone is claiming that they're using it. We're going to talk about some examples of how machine learning and AI are actually being used by journalists in newsrooms today and in the past couple of years. Sort of theoretically how you'll be able to use these. You could use them now or in the very near future, as well as some ways in which these technologies being used by people outside of journalism are going to cause us some problems in ways that can be pretty scary. So to start off, what even is machine learning? It's math. It's just math. It's really fancy math, but it's not magic. It's just math that you could probably understand if you took like a bunch of classes and got a PhD. But I definitely don't have that PhD. Most machine learning practitioners have no idea how this works from a mathematical perspective. So it can seem like magic, even though it's just the computer is manipulating some numbers in some ways that you don't understand. But what it's doing is it's finding patterns. You're giving it a bunch of data that encodes some of your hypotheses about some sort of pattern that might exist, some sort of pattern that you hope is meaningful. Maybe there's a couple of hypotheses in there, and that the answers about what patterns actually do exist in the data that you have are going to be useful to you in some way. For us as journalists, hopefully that means that we've found something out about the world that we didn't know before, that the computer is telling us. So what is AI? It's the same thing. If you say, oh, we use artificial intelligence, what that probably means is you're trying to raise money. Machine learning is just sort of what the mathematicians and the programmers call it. AI is what the marketers call it. There's a little bit of difference if you're like a philosopher. But for our purposes, it's the same thing. I'm going to say machine learning because I'm a computer programmer, sort of by trade. But if you're curious about artificial intelligence, just pretend that's the word I'm using. So how is it that your organization can benefit from machine learning? This is not my metaphor, by the way. I'm copying it from someone. I don't know who, but it's not my idea. So imagine that you had unlimited interns. Think about your intern for next summer, your intern from last summer. Unfortunately, they probably had some sort of kind of menial task to do, reading a bunch of documents, making a bunch of phone calls, and they probably impressed you with how bright they are. They did a really good job. They knocked the ball out of the park. Imagine you had unlimited versions of that intern, except they can't make phone calls and they're not that bright. All they can do is that sort of menial task. That's what machine learning is. You're getting the computer to do some sort of really menial task that you could never get so many interns to do it. But it's just sort of reading a document and counting up the words, or measuring some piece of data a gazillion times. You can't get a person to do that, but the computer will do it happily. So here are some examples, the real-life examples of journalists using machine learning to help them do their jobs, to break news, investigate, find the bad guy, that sort of thing. My first example is a story from about a year and a half ago by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. They started off just looking at Georgia, because they're in Georgia, but they expanded to the entire United States. They downloaded all of these documents from all of these state medical boards, which publish these documents about how doctors who are disciplined, what happened, what the case was that they were charged with doing that got them to maybe lose their license or temporarily lose their license. And they found that a lot of these people had moved from state to state to sort of dodge these sanctions. And what they were most interested in was not the doctors who had been sort of doing something funny with their money, or doctors who had been prescribing opioids to people they shouldn't have been, or prescribing too many of them, but rather doctors who were sexually abusing their patients. But the problem was, they had 50 states worth of bad doctor paperwork going back years and years. And so what were you going to do? You can't have a handful of, I guess there are 4 people's names on this story. You can't spend 4 of your top-notch investigative people reading all these documents for like an entire year. That'd just be a waste of time. So instead, what they did was they built a machine learning system to search through all of these documents to find, and it's sort of hard to read in the small text, but read through all these documents, looking for all of these words that might indicate that this was a sexually abusive doctor, or might indicate that this was a doctor who was doing some other bad thing that was not super relevant. They trained a statistical model that says, oh, if you have all these words about genitalia or whatever, it's a lot more likely that it's going to be a sexually abusive doctor. And so what this was it was able to sort of separate, the computer was able to separate the wheat from the chaff. So instead of reading millions of documents, or however many it was, they only had to read 10% of those, or something like that, which saves them a lot of time, and they were able to do this amazing story that exposed a lot of really bad doctors that was really in the public interest. So my second example is from BuzzFeed. Peter Aldis, who was mentioned earlier in a question, really great data reporter. I think that as was mentioned before, the code from this is on GitHub probably. They were looking for these aircraft that are connected probably to the government through some shell companies that are circling over American cities, doing something sketchy, kind of like surveillance. Maybe it's cameras, maybe it's cell phones. Not really clear, but Peter was able to track down a bunch of these planes. The problem was that they had gotten a gigantic database of the flight paths of like every aircraft over the United States for a year. This is a huge amount of data with, like, you know, the guy who flies on Sunday with the plane he built in his garage, you know, commercial airliners, rich people and bankers flying around, helicopters with medevac and the TV helicopters. How do you separate out the actually sketchy airplanes that they were looking for from this gigantic mess of data? Again, you probably could have had interns go through and look at every single flight path. You know, is this a Delta plane? Is this, you know, some banker just flying from the Hamptons to Miami? It would have taken way too long. So instead, they found some way to represent each airplane's flight path. Some stuff about, you know, how often did it change altitude, how much, you know, distance start to end did it cover versus the amount of sort of linear distance that it flew. So these sort of hairballs here are where it didn't cover a lot of distance over a long period of time. It was able to, again, separate the wheat from the chaff in terms of finding which of the aircraft's flight paths were most interesting. So then a human could apply their knowledge to that to say, oh, this one really is a sketchy airplane. Here's a project that I did. We had a gigantic database of press releases from Congress. And I used this machine learning tool to ingest all of these press releases of, you know, we renamed the post office or whatever it is, into a system that sort of learns a little bit about how English works. And you can compare the sort of the average of all their press releases, or the average of the words in each press release, to get an idea about what it means. And so this system, without me teaching it a whole lot, just feeding in half a gigabyte of press releases, it was able to learn that Representative Paul Ryan cares a lot about taxation, which, if you follow US politics, he's obsessed with tax policy. So the computer was able to learn this all by its own. Chuck Schumer, likewise, knows a lot about, or spends a lot of his time on transportation. But what you've got to be careful of is that what the computer thinks is interesting might not be what you think is interesting. Using a similar tool to this, I compared a few years of ProPublica articles, which is where I work now, to a few years of articles from the New York Times, where I used to work, to see what was most distinctive about ProPublica's articles. I'd hoped it would be something like some topic of a ProPublica investigation. No. The most distinctive word from ProPublica compared to the New York Times is the word spokesperson. Why? New York Times style demands that you say spokesman or spokeswoman. New York Times, or the ProPublica allows spokesperson. This is sort of interesting if you're a copy editor, but it's not the like hard-hitting fact that I was really hoping for. So you got to be careful about that with machine learning. So I'm running out of time, but you probably already have some machine learning experts in your newsroom. They're in charge of your A/B testing. A/B testing is sort of rudimentary machine learning, and even more complicated ML techniques are being used to maximize your ad sales, your page views, these sorts of things. And I bet you that those people on your business side would love to spend a couple Fridays teaming up with a reporter to find something really cool. But here's what you've got to be careful of. People outside of your newsrooms are using sort of the combination of virtual reality and machine learning to create these really convincing fake videos. Here's a screenshot from the New York Times of Kevin Roose pasting his face onto some famous guy, I don't know. And you generate these really, without a whole lot of effort, can generate these totally convincing fake videos and totally convincing fake audio. You can make President Trump or former President Barack Obama say whatever you want them to say. And it sounds totally convincing. And I don't know of any examples of this fooling journalists yet, but like that's going to be coming. because it takes a couple hours and $80 to make one of these. And some of these trolls who were mentioned in yesterday's sessions are gonna, find $80 somewhere and build one of these and try to fool you. And that's really gonna be a problem because you can't rely on the fact that it's a video. You can't rely on the fact that it really is audio and it really sounds like, oh, it's a leaked tape of Obama saying something terrible, because it might just be someone who applied these fancy computational techniques to generate some scary fake propaganda. So, machine learning and AI, it's really useful for investigative reporting. Your newsroom's probably already using it, and you can get some impressive results if you have those people team up, but you got to be careful of those scary deepfakes.
I'm Mia Trams, currently newly editorial director of enterprise and immersive experiences for Time. But for the last 2 years, I was the managing editor of Life VR, which was Time Inc., now Meredith's company-wide VR and AR initiative. I'll talk a little bit about what Life VR is, but I'm going to try to get into the content. And what I'll show you is a bunch of what I would consider to be case studies for the different types of ways that you can think about and approach VR and AR for your organization. So Life VR is meant to be an umbrella brand for all of Time Inc. and now Meredith's titles. So in my role, I got to work with all these amazing brands, from Time to Sports Illustrated, Travel and Leisure, People, Entertainment Weekly, goes on and on and on. And before we get into the content, the kind of ethos was that at the beginning, 2 years ago, which seems like a lifetime at this point, distribution was one of the hardest things to solve for with VR. So the folks at Time Inc. that came up with this concept and this brand thought, hey, if you were looking for this People VR experience, and in the same place where you found it, there was also a Travel and Leisure VR experience, maybe you'd want to watch both of them. So in that way, we tried to use the collective power of our brands to help with the distribution problem. The other thing to know is it is an extension of the Life magazine brand. And when they were trying to come up with a name for this new brand, they found Henry Luce's original mission statement for Life magazine. If you read it, it reads actually like a VR pitch. He's talking about taking people to the moon, through the shadows of the jungle. He actually says walking through walls. It's a very VR-y kind of statement. And if you think about what Life magazine was, it was a huge magazine. The photos were giant. It was about as immersive as you could get with a print product. And we really felt that VR could be something that represents the next evolution of what that brand was meant to do, to take you to places that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. So we launched in 2016 in September, and we've done a bunch of projects since then. I think I've produced and or distributed about 30 projects at this point. One of the first 360 projects that we did was for Time.com. We partnered with AP to do 2 videos. One was a 360 video of Trump's inauguration, and simultaneously we were covering the Women's March in 360, and we published both to Time's platforms simultaneously. This, though it was not too long ago, was an exercise in speed for us. Any of you who are working in 360 know that even the commercially available 360 cameras that are out there have had a very fast evolution over the last 2 years. At this point, when we were doing this, about as fast as we could get content up was, quality content up was, a few hours. You can live stream at this point. It's changed, quite rapidly. So with this, we were really going for speed and how fast could we get these 2 pieces up. The next evolution of this was a live stream. We live streamed the Great American Solar Eclipse, And this was a huge learning curve for everyone that worked on the project. Truly a beast that took many, many months to figure out and prepare for. But I think the results were great and really make a case for both 360 video and live stream VR. One of the things that I've had to be an advocate for in our company is applying these two technologies, but really making the different brands understand that VR and 360 video aren't for everything. They're not for every story. You really want to find the stories that lend themselves well to the format. And in this case, we hit the magic sweet spot of space content, which time readers love. A really huge event that lent itself well to a live format. And the results are pretty amazing. It was the most streamed piece of content that Time has ever published to its YouTube channel. We had 5 million concurrent viewers. And that was our first dip into this space. So we're excited to keep pushing there. I'll just quickly go through a few other 360 VR projects. Quick audience poll. How many of you are making VR? How many of you have watched VR? Okay, how many of you have watched in a cardboard headset? How many of you have used a Vive? Okay, so when we're talking about 360 VR, it's probably what you experienced in a cardboard headset. You as the viewer are at a fixed location. You can't walk into the environment you're looking at. It's a more passive, voyeuristic experience. When we get to the higher end of the projects, which we'll touch on at the end here, you're talking about something that is closer to true virtual reality, a computer-generated three-dimensional environment that you can actually walk into, interact with, and it's more akin to a video game than a 360 video. So here's some 360 video projects. This was one of the pieces that we launched Life VR with. It's a recreation of a rescue mission that an American couple led from Nazi-occupied Germany back to the States. It was a companion piece to Ken Burns' documentary of the same title. For InStyle, we did this really fun VR music video that the editors of InStyle styled, and it featured Yuna, who's this incredible, amazing, up-and-coming singer. For travel and leisure, we've done a ton of VR travel guides. These have been very popular. They also have a long shelf life, which is great. The first two are singular pieces that run about 5 minutes. The last one we actually published as a 4-part series. For people, we've had an interesting approach. We're actually acting as a distributor in this case, working with the film studios who are producing all manner of very cool, very high-end 360 experiences to market their films. But they are really well-told stories, so we get to distribute them to people's audience through the Life VR channels. We also have created behind-the-scenes content for people for some of these films as well. Murder on the Orient Express was a great example of that, where we went on set where they had built an actual train and train station for the film. And then this is one I'll talk a little bit more about at the end. We just got nominated for an Emmy for this. This is Capturing Everest. It was one of the first projects that I produced. It's a 4-part VR docuseries that was the first VR documentary to take you from the bottom of Mount Everest to the summit. And we follow 3 really amazing climbers, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that towards the end because it was also our first AR execution. All the R's. Okay, so this is where, this is my sweet spot and where I really most enjoy working in VR. So these, again, are experiences that are more akin to video games. Instead of rendering out a 360 video file, you have what is essentially an app or a piece of software that is running in real time as your user is experiencing it. This requires, of course, a higher-end headset like an Oculus Rift or a Vive and a very expensive PC that those headsets need to run off of. Those prices are going down, thankfully, but for the most part, this is the least accessible version of VR to your readers. I want to caveat that with each of these projects, that was very much taken into consideration in the distribution plan that we had for them. And we have partnered with museums and high schools to bring these experiences to where an audience would be instead of expecting people to watch them at home. We're trying to make them as publicly accessible as possible. So this first one was an idea that came from our history editor, Lily Rothman. It's called Remembering Pearl Harbor. We made it for the 75th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. And what we wanted to do here was, A, bring you back to that moment in history in as realistic and as journalistically accurate a way as possible. B, we wanted to make it educational, and in that it should be appropriate for children. So very notably, you know, when we take you to the actual harbor and you're seeing the aftermath of the attack, we are not showing you dead bodies, we're not showing you blood and gore. It's almost like a video game environment without any people or avatars running around. That does remove a layer of reality for the experience, but this is a very powerful medium, and we did not want to traumatize anybody. So, you know, it was a choice that we made. Those are choices that all of us are going to have to make when we're working in this medium. This is a piece that takes you back to this moment in history through the eyes of Lieutenant Jim Downing. When we recorded his voiceover for the piece, he was 103 years old, one of the oldest living veterans to survive the attack. He actually just passed away at the age of 104 early this year. And so in that way, we feel really lucky to have preserved both his story and his point of view of what happened. We begin by taking you into a archetypal 1940s home that's on the outskirts of Chicago. Everything that you see in this home is an object from the World War II Museum, who we collaborated with on this. They sent us images of objects they have in their archive, and then we worked with a production company named Deluxe, who built the experience for us to recreate those objects as photorealistically as possible in 3 dimensions. So everything in this living room, as the viewer, you have the ability to pick up, touch, you know, interact with. So I'm getting the, wrap it up. I'll just quickly play you a video of what this looks like, if I can get it.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
My name is Jim Downing. I'm 103 years old plus. When the attack on Pearl Harbor occurred, I was postmaster of the battleship USS West Virginia. So the first Japanese plane that I saw was flying low and slow. He was so close you could almost see the color of his eyes. It was not unusual to see Army planes flying around
on Sunday mornings. So at this point I was thinking, this is one of ours, until he got above, and I could see the red circles under the wings. They did a great job of camouflaging their planes to look like ours.
Everybody was a hero. Everybody that survived instinctively did the right thing and helped others at the risk of their own life.
So it looks like I won't have time to take you through the other projects that we've done, but very broadly, we've created a VR hologram of Buzz Aldrin to take you from his landing site on the moon to the surface of Mars and took that to the Air and Space Museum. We've created a relaxation experience called Lumen that is at the Stanford Children's Hospital and currently helping kids cope with stress before and after heart surgery, which is also another revenue stream for our company down the road. And then lastly, we launched our AR capability last year and have activated several magazines, including the Capturing Everest issue of SI, and most recently, the Bill Gates edited issue of Time, where we kind of brought a bunch of infographics to life using AR. So that's it. Thanks.
Yes, sorry.
We have just a few minutes, but you can talk a little bit.
Okay. So it looks like we got to do this part pretty quickly, but I wanted to go ahead and ask some very practical questions that hopefully can help with, you know, some of the ways in which you all might approach bringing these technologies into your own organizations. So Zach and Jeremy, I would love if you could just talk about what do your teams look like when you're producing either an AR experience, both on the dev and creative sides? And what does your team look like when you're applying machine learning? Can you just really practically talk about the processes and the teams that bring those to life?
Sure. So we have people who are charged with sourcing the 3D models in the first place. So we do some of our own scanning, but oftentimes, in a lot of examples you're looking at are scans that were produced by others, either artists or through photogrammetry. So some people doing sourcing. Rarely is it the case that a model comes in and it's good to go straight into the app. So we have a few people on staff who will work on things like lighting. Lighting and shadows become like the whole thing, and without which it's not a really photorealistic experience. And so do that, and then
these are developers, 3D animators.
They're developers moonlighting as 3D animators. So we've not created a separate team dedicated entirely to this. We're not producing the volume enough to justify that.
Great.
So the team for the Represent project there, where we were summarizing each member of Congress's sort of political priorities, as well as some of the distinctive topics they care about. That was a team. There were 3 of us working on that project, along with a couple editors who edit all the computer programmer journalists, the news app developers at ProPublica. The project is run by a guy named Derek Willis, who knows everything there is to know about the U.S. Congress. And this website and the database behind it are sort of like an adjunct of his brain. Like every piece of data you could gather about the U.S. Congress is in there somewhere because Derek knows about it. And so one of the things they have is we've gotten there is these press releases. And the machine learning aspect of it was all me. And between Derek and my editors, we went back and forth over a while to figure out what the best way was to summarize, to use this sort of understanding of U.S. politics that the computer had gained from this database, figure out the best way to use that to summarize something about each member of Congress for our readers. And iterated a bunch, and what you saw on the screen is what came out.
Thank you. And definitely if people have questions, feel free to come up to the mics. So something that you mentioned in your presentation is these videos using AI to do nefarious things. Jared, I know that a lot of the conversation around blockchain is that it can help with transparency and trust in journalism. So I wonder, anyone who has thoughts on the panel, could we talk a little bit about, is there an intersection between those two things? Can you fact check, or can blockchain be used to help fact check some of these, fakes that might be coming down the pipe? Or, what are the ways in which blockchain helps us with transparency and trust?
Sure. So, much of its value is there. This idea of giving economic incentives for people to do certain things that help results, or help move you towards the results that you're looking for. So there's actually some media companies out today. Civil is one, CIVIL, Join Civil, which is a new media company built on blockchain, built on that trust and community sources of token curated registries and a lot of more acronyms and buzzwords that I will not waste the little amount of time that we have here. But yes, this idea of community enablement, setting certain rules, right, and smart contracts and things that you must abide by. I think what's important to recognize, and again, going down to the rowdy and the dowdy of blockchain, is that there's very much a gray area, right? And I like to look at it, especially from a poet perspective, that we're enabling. We're not going to just come out and disrupt how things work today. So things like machine learning or AR or VR, we were talking about the other day, there are certain components in libraries that will help enable those experiences. They're not so much to replace them, but I think based on how you look at those things and take advantage of the different factors that blockchain could offer, both technically and also through the way that you build this community and through token incentivization, then yes, the quick answer is yes, there's a lot of opportunities.
So then I guess I have a question for the three of you. I know that obviously we're in a hugely difficult time in this industry in terms of staying afloat and generating revenue. And a big struggle that I had in the last 2 years was justifying what I was doing. And to be totally transparent, a lot of the projects that I just showed you on the screen, I had to go outside of our company to fundraise for. That production budget was not coming from within our company. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how does the work that each of you are doing relate to a larger strategy around the business of your company, if at all? Maybe it's completely separate and you have the ability to do some R&D that doesn't have to be tied to revenue. What are the ways in which it's related to your organization's businesses?
So I very much live on the editorial side, so I can't speak too much to revenue, but I do know that within, in terms of worth, I love R&D departments. I think they're awesome, and I like going to play with their things, but we've been making, hopefully, an actual product that can be used, and a tool that might be applicable elsewhere. So I also previously worked for the BBC, and I had a similar role there, which is to kind of originate things and also make sure that they were immediately usable by other parts of a bigger organization. So we are already sort of speaking with other parts of NBC about where what we're doing might be applicable or might be useful. So there's worth in that.
Yeah, I would think about this a lot. It's a huge risk for a news organization to be distracted by like whatever feels like the next thing and over-invest in areas that aren't like connected to the core of what we're actually trying to do for our users or for where we generate our revenue. So our approach to that is twofold. So one, our specific product strategy at Quartz is the products we release are manifestations of what Quartz's journalism is all about, specific to that platform. Our emails are supposed to be read as emails. They don't point back to the website. They're just supposed to be really good emails. Our charting platform, Atlas, is that and only that. And our app, as you know, you could only experience it as an app. It has no particular relationship to our website. That's just inherent to our strategy and what we're trying to do. So part of this is like baking it into like that's what Quartz is. I don't think that would work necessarily for another news organization, but it works for us because that is what we are. And then the second is, to the point about R&D, we established about 2 years ago what we call the workshop. It's run by a single person, and Sam Williams, who was the original developer on the app and had a lot to do with developing AR in the app last year. And his job is detached from the day-to-day and is charged with experimenting with new technologies, helping others in the organization do that. There's an actual workshop that was pictured in one of the videos I shared where like messing around is the point. But it's a single person, and we're trying very deliberately to make it not an R&D lab in the sense that it's on a different floor or detached from the day-to-day. And I guess finally, wait till next month for the first AR ad in the app, and that's we would view part of what whether something is working or not is whether we can connect it back to the core business. Our core business is advertising, and so stay tuned.
I'm entirely news side, so I don't know a whole lot about the revenue question. But one of the neat things that makes the sort of investment in one of these machine learning sorts of things sort of worthwhile is that once you've sort of trained this model, you can keep feeding new stuff into it. With the example of the Congress press releases database, every week we get a whole bunch of new press releases, feed them in, and those numbers will change a little bit. If Paul Ryan decides to stop talking about taxes and talk more about transportation for whatever reason, his transportation number will go up. And that all happens while I'm doing other stuff. This probably happened yesterday morning, because it happens to go on Friday mornings. And I'm doing other stuff. And so since we have this investment in this evergreen Congress database, the investment in machine learning, as opposed to an investment in a gazillion interns, means that it's just sort of infinitely repeatable as long as the power stays on and Amazon continues renting us computers.
And just one thing around that, because Zach said something that I think is key, and I'll put on my post hat that I did before this job where I ran R&D on the commercial side, is that I think the biggest successes for funding a lot of these endeavors is to move away from the idea of platform dependence, to Zach's point. But even like at at a higher philosophical level, right? At the Post, through ARC projects and Red, and I'm looking at Trey and what Vox is doing too, it's this idea that you get something extremely unique and valuable with a partnership with a publisher, but that is something that could live everywhere, right? And that's a complete change of thought from 7, 8, like a decade ago, where we used to say, hey, come work at the Huffington Post where I was, and we'll build something for you that could only live on the Huffington Post, and that's the value of working with the Huffington Post. Now it's this idea of, hey, work with us, we could build something innovative, you could run against our audiences, but also take it to go wherever you so wish. And I think that that's extremely important to realize for the success of broadening revenue streams and experimentation, that there is benefit with things living outside of your ecosystem as long as you're a partner there.
Okay, that's it.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
I think we had a great panel. Thank you very much. It was great. We have a break now, but before the break, I'm gonna do some lunches. Well, let's start. Gina, where are you? You're gonna get it again. Gina, I hope you're close. Oh, you're not here? Where is she? Oh, she's not here. So let's go to Gerson. Gerson, my fellow Brazilian, you're not here, so you're not gonna get it. Oh, you are. Oh, here. Brazilians don't know how to catch, but let's or lunch. Whoa! I spent every got. So second one, a T-shirt. This is gonna be great. Who is that? Luis Marti. Luis, where? I can't see. Oh, here. Okay. I'm not gonna get there. So someone catch it. Whoa! we are about to start our international panel that in the last years I'm very grateful to Maria Teresa Ronderos, the director of the Program on Independent Journalism of the Open Society Foundations. It's a wonderful program based in London that helps journalism around the world. And Maria Teresa has been kind and generous enough to organize a panel here in the last few years where she brings journalists from around the world. And this year she picked a topic that I love it, very, very special topic, as you're going to see. Maria Teresa, you have the floor.
Hello, thank you very much. Thank you, Rosenthal, it's a real privilege to be here, and thank you for everybody here. We're going to have a fabulous panel. We're going to talk about satire and political humor and how in many parts of the world this is the last resort in many ways, how to shake power, how to talk truth to power. Sometimes the only way to do it is through humor. And sometimes it is easier, and sometimes it's much more difficult because you can also offend many people. So we're going to have a great panel. So we're going to start with King Muriuki from Kenya. And then we are going to have Isam Urak, I'm sorry about the pronunciations, I'm not very good, Urakiat from Jordan, and Vahe and Mariana from Media Lab from Armenia, and Carlos Cortez from Colombia, and Sam Farai or Comrade Fatso from Zimbabwe, and Haris Dedovic from Bosnia, and Juan Andres Rabel from Venezuela. So it's going to be a very rich panel, and this is the order of the panel. So I'm just going to introduce King from Kenya, which is part of a fabulous humorist group in that country.
Good morning, guys. My name is King Muriuki, and I am a director and producer of the XYZ Show, which is Africa's first political puppet satire show. We've been running since 2009, done over 180 episodes. And yes, for those who are not familiar with the concept, we are similar to the British Spitting Image and the French Le Guignol. Yes, so I think we'll just show you a quick clip for you to get what we do, and then we can talk further.
Okay, Ivanka, look, I got two cases in front of me, and I'm gonna use one of them to blow Kim to hell. Not the Kardashian, her fine. I mean North Korean Kim.
Let's not do that, Dad.
You know, if I don't do this, the next thing you know, there will be chemical weapons all over the place. I'm gonna kill them before they can kill themselves. It's the least I can do, trust me.
It is literally not the least you can do.
Now listen, Ivanka, I've got nuclear and I've got atomic. I need your expert advice. Which one is better? Which do you think? Nuclear or atomic? Nuclear, atomic, nuclear, atomic. They're both great. They're so great.
Dad, put those cases away right now.
What was it? Did you say nuclear?
No.
Because I like atomic. I'm going to go with atomic.
No.
It's the mother of all bombs. I think it's great. Everyone loves it. I'm going to use that.
No.
Hello? Master King, is that you? Is that you? Okay. Why you not tell me you test the nuclear? Why? And China is your only friend. You know this. Why you always so stubborn and so stupid? Okay. Because you're my one friend, I do you one favor. China do you one favor this first time, okay? Okay? Run and hide. Go home, take out the wife, take out the baby, take out all the money, run and hide. The bomb is coming. The bomb is coming.
Mr. President, We've just received satellite imagery showing a group of school children at the nuclear facility in Pyongyang.
You know, those kids will have a better chance of the afterlife than they do with having Kim as president. Trust me, I'm doing them a favor.
Yeah, okay. Oh, hang on, Mr. President. Just wait a minute. We now see a group of swimsuit models. Oh, they're blondes and wow, brunettes emerging from that same nuclear facility. Should we abort the mission, Mr. President?
You know what? Abort this mission immediately. We've got to abort it.
Oh, damn! Look at that! They knew we were coming, sir. What are we gonna do now?
Oh, it's the fake news. The media is selling information to North Korea, and this proves it. I'm going to build a wall around CNN. But first, show me those swimsuit models. I know for a fact that the satellite angle, it will give me a clear shot of those.
Thank you, thank you. So you can see we are clearly over the top, and the environment in which we work in is sometimes considered very conservative. But satire is an important and often untouchable tool where conversations that are deemed too sensitive or controversial should happen. And we take that very seriously. Our main avenue for broadcast usually is TV, but we get too much government interference. As many of you might know, the Kenyan government does not have a very good track record of keeping off its press, based on the media blackout earlier this year. But then also we do have problems with self-censorship from the broadcasters who might find our content a bit too touchy for the audience. But if we do not offend most of the time, we assume that we are not effective when it comes to satire. That's our kind of our motto. Yes, 502. Yes, so we have found online distribution to be a very important avenue to reach our audiences. Most of the times when we can't get to our million-plus viewership per episode via TV, we turn to YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter to get to our very loyal audiences. We have over 500,000 fans on Facebook, over 100,000 fans following us on Twitter, and I think up to now, a total of 10.2 million views on YouTube. So yeah, I don't know. If I go further than that, I will definitely go about 5 minutes. But thank you for your time. Nice.
Very happy to be here. I'm here to talk about Al-Hudud, the political satire magazine of the kind of the Middle East and North Africa. It's basically just the onion for that region. I'm Asam Araqat. I'm the editor of it. We write from a pan-Arab perspective, aiming at the whole of the Middle East. We have writers and readers all over the region. We have about 350,000 of them. We got nominated to One World Media Award 3 years in a row, and we to the Drum Online Media Award last year. We do satire, but we take it very seriously. But contrary to what most people think, it's more people than the governments in the Middle East that don't want to hear satire. Satire is more of a liberal thing. Conservatives don't appreciate it as much because by the nature of it, it has more like they have more lines, and satire tends to break lines. So as satirists in the Middle East, if we wanted to aim at the liberal Arab demographic there, we would have been talking to a tiny circle of people in our own tiny echo chamber. So, but what we wanted to do was to create, wasn't just to create satire or stand up to authority, it was about opening conversations. So, one example of how we did that recently was when we created our chatbot last year. We get contacted a lot on Facebook. We get like hundreds of people every week. And they usually do that for the same reasons. Mostly either they love our work and they want to tell us that, or they are like angry. So when someone starts chatting to us and opts for the second option to express their anger, our character asks them how they want to express that. They get to choose between the most popular ways people did before the app was created. It was either to call us liars or to swear at us. But we left out the quite popular option of sending us death threats because we don't want to put ideas into people's heads. We get that enough. At that point, if they choose to swear, and a large number does, the bot asks them what kind of an insult they want to send us, above the belt or below. We ask them why they chose that. We ask them what makes them angry about what we're doing. And in that process, we explain what we do and why it matters. So obviously, someone who was coming to swear at us wasn't coming for a conversation, but we opened a conversation despite that. And now these people, instead of swearing around aimlessly, they're commenting on our articles and arguing about what they think of them. We kind of forced them to articulate their anger into actual conversations. But at the end, a chatbot could only take so much abuse. So these chats remain in a closed conversation. And to have a proper conversation, we need to have a more public one. So we created an online community and invited our readers to join us, to write ideas, to propose, to talk to us about what they think of our work, and to discuss other people's work. So we started it by doing a call to all of our readers, which said, it's like, whatever you are, a Muslim or a Christian, an atheist or a Pastafarian, a Salafi or a vegetarian, as long as you're funny, your comments are, your contributions will be taken into account. And for those of you who don't know, a Salafi is a follower of a very conservative form of Islam, similar to the one in Saudi. It gets relevant in a bit. Over the coming few months, over 1,000 people joined us from over 40 countries. The community is so engaged that when we sent them a 50-question survey, 700 of them finished it to the last question. So they're like really into it. But that wasn't the most interesting part. The group was very diverse. There's men and women, loads of refugees, journalists, students from all sorts of backgrounds. Some are pro-Assad or anti-Iran or pro-Erdogan, anti-Qatar. That is like a whole minefield of views. And a lot of them disagree with our perspective. They disagree with satire, some of them, and they all disagree with each other. But they all got in there in order to talk about that. And that was great, but that wasn't the most interesting part. What truly fascinated me personally was that a Salafi did actually join us. For me, when we posted that post, like the funniest part for it for me was that, was the Salafi. Like, we couldn't be that diverse. No one could be, it felt like. But then he came in and he was like hitting right and left, all sorts of jokes, from politics to hypocritical religious leaders. So we thought anyone can embrace satire, because satire is not about irreverence and just making fun and breaking lines and challenging authorities. It's about being able to laugh at yourself. It's about to be able to see your own mistakes. It's about accepting criticism. And it's about not treating leaders as untouchable entities. It's taking things less seriously, but at the same, paradoxically, it's taking things a lot more seriously because you engage people in topics that they've stopped caring about. So we thought satire is a way of thinking which could and should spread, especially in a region that is as hot and uncomfortable as the Middle East. So what we thought was satire is kind of the easy part. If you have an interesting angle or something like powerful to say, it just goes down to sentence construction. So we created an in-depth guide to satire, which guides people on how to write comedy on the one hand, but more importantly, how to use satire to say what they want to say. Then we asked the community which of them would like to take satire more seriously and join us on and work with us directly. We got masses of applications and we interviewed over 100 of them and started working with 16 now. These interns were just as diverse as the group. Some of them have PhDs and some of them are 18-year-old students. Each of the 4 in-house writers that we have is working hand in hand on a daily basis with all of them. And the aim is that after a year, these 4 will become editors in themselves and train another 4 under them. And I don't think I'm too overambitious when I say that if we go at that rate, we will be able to create about 1.048 million Arab satirists. Thank you.
We publish cartoons every day in country with the absence of freedom of press, where almost all the media are controlled from one place, the residence of the president. The cartoons are a very impressive way to send messages and to inform people about everything, but they also can be dangerous, especially for cartoonists. We have experienced a lot of cases during these years. Our car was broken into and all the cartoons that we have printed for the exhibition were stolen. We and our family members have received death threats. When we tried to organize an exhibition, nobody agreed to rent us a space, so we decided to go to the streets and we organized an open-air exhibition. When we tried to distribute our print newspaper, all the possible channels were blocked. We realized that our cartoons are important and have power. A country like Armenia is an unending source of inspiration for cartoonists, from a Philistine society that lives by stereotypes to the president that is unable to leave his chair and after being in power for 10 years want to stay 10 years more by changing the constitution. Armenian clergy is one of my favorite topics. Let me give you a couple of examples of our cartoons so you can understand the problems we are trying to speak about. When Pope visited Armenia, we imagined a situation when our archbishop that likes to drive Bentley car and carries a gun asked the Pope during the formal dinner if hell really exists. Our capital streets are flooded with countless speed radars and road cameras, which look in all directions, capture everything, and penalize everybody. In our cartoon, they have even entered people's house and fined presidents for speeding. According to publication in press, those speed radars belong to president's brother, who pockets 17% of all the fine collected. At the Armenian borders, our soldiers are often killed in shootouts. It appears to these soldiers are mostly from poor families, because sons of the rich and powerful are exempted from military service. We are a small country, and as a common for people from small countries, we are mainly interested in local news and problems, but there are still events and persons worldwide that can be ignored. And at the end, a little bit Donald Trump. Thank you very much. I'll let Mariana to continue.
Hello. My name is Mariana Grigorian. I used to introduce myself as an investigative journalist, but recent years, our cartoon project turned me from investigative journalist into a cartoon lady. And it shows the success of our project. We are proud very much. Political cartoon project we started more than 3 years ago, and it helps us to tell the stories by cartoons and to send impressive messages and to help people to be informed and understand many things we could not say in other way. At the end of January, I became I was in spotlight of the media and local and international institutions, and the reason was one of our cartoons. It was a news that many media told about, but our cartoon brings very active discussions, and even we got death threats. And it shows the corruption in Ministry of Defense. This cartoon helped many people to understand the reality. And in general, cartoons help us to, we are creating cartoons daily, on a daily basis, and we also help people to, as a news cartoons, we are producing news cartoons, and this is one of the examples. We saw news, very interesting news. In 1 month, National Security Service bought 70 tons of sugar, and our cartoonist used this information, and it became a very popular cartoon, and people started to share this, to discuss, and it was very interesting. We used to tell the stories using cartoons, and every day our readers wait to see what will be our reaction to this or that event, and what will be the next. And we have a huge army of readers and supporters. We are also started our new project, and we are producing comic stories, and this is stories that show our life. It is all about our society, and these are also very impressive. And also we are using other ways to send messages, like street art, to raise important topics. We are the only media in Armenia that producing cartoons, and this is not. I'm sorry. And we always get questions. Don't you afraid? Aren't you? Do you have children or something like that? And these are questions people always ask, and I think the answer is our work. The influence we have with cartoons hardly can do without with other ways. This is the protest when people used our cartoons, and now these protests are going in Armenia. Thousands of people went to streets against president, and we are very proud to see this situation. They are using our cartoons, and this is the answer of our work. We are very proud we could do. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to explain a little detail, which is that Mariana and Vache are husband and wife, and this is a joint operation, the Media Lab. They've been working together with the investigative arm in one side and the pencil and the drawing power in the other. So a big applause. Now we have Carlos Cortés from La Mesa de Centro, which is a project of La Silla Vacía in Colombia.
Thank you, Mariate. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Carlos Cortés. I'm developing an idea called La Mesa de Centro, which literally translates the center table, but it would be really more like the coffee table. It's an open-ed satire video blog within La Silla Vacía, which is akin to the Político in Colombia. So it's an online independent blog which has been around for almost 10 years. La Mesa de Centro is really a very young project. We started in May 2017, so we are going to be 1 year old in a couple of weeks. We are averaging about 250K users per episode. We are producing around 3 episodes per month, and we are starting to do some experiments with a shorter version. La Mesa de Centro's episodes average 6 to 7 minutes, and roughly 70% of the people are going until the end of the videos, which is a good indicator for us. We're currently being funded by a program on independent journalism of Open Society and starting to explore new avenues of funding. We're not really interested or really in the moment to monetize it in a different way. So what's our idea in very general terms? On the one hand, we want to engage people in politics. We don't want to alienate them. We've seen a lot of projects of political humor in the region and in Colombia which have been very effective exploiting indignation, and to me at least it might be not the best way to get people to be interested in politics and really becoming active citizens in politics. We want to explain policy issues. We are very aware about the limits of humor to explore some of those topics, but we're trying to take risks to be able to transmit difficult issues to our audience. We're trying to use counter-narratives against misinformation. This is something that comes from another part of my work. I work on policy and internet media issues, so this is something that I'm quite interested in. So we try to include that, if not in most of our episodes. And we want to build an internet culture. We like to use memes, we would like to use videos that are becoming viral, and we want to, in that way, also communicate to a specific audience who reads La Silla Vacía. So I want to show you like 3 main issues that we're constantly addressing in the program. The first one is the media. It's no secret for anybody, and especially in Latin America, where we don't have strong media outlets that are not tied to an economic group, where there's constant criticism against them. So we try to take the word of those criticism and show people what we're seeing, not tell them, but show them to them. And we try to do them with a heavy exercise of monitoring. We want to really show them the content that they are actually criticizing. So in this clip, you are going to see the introduction of the program and the header that we built, and a clip that we did around a very well-known journalist in Colombia who's called Julio Sanchez, who is very close to the Attorney General, and it was something that everybody said, but we went into the coverage to see exactly how that was happening.
En tiempos de crisis, todos buscan un héroe, pues la W ya tiene uno.
El doctor Martínez viene de una exitosa carrera pública y privada. Hoy es uno de los abogados más importantes del país.
En la mesa de centro, Néstor Humberto Martínez y la W Radio. Un amor que nunca termina. Primera parte. Si usted se está preguntando quién va a sacar a Colombia de este lodazal de corrupción, Julio Sánchez Cristo le tiene la respuesta.
Entonces, Alberto, le falta mucho por hacer al señor fiscal, pero yo sí veo una luz en el fiscal, Alberto. ¿Qué más nos queda?
Según Julio, Martínez no solo es la persona que está poniendo a todos los corruptos tras las rejas, también es un hombre sencillo, trabajador y excelente miembro de familia.
Se la pasa dedicado a esto. Su vida personal es su señora, sus hijos, sus nietos, su hermana. No más.
So this became just quite ridiculous when we did 2 episodes about him, where he was basically saying that he was not only the best general attorney in history, but he was also a great husband, he was also a great guy, he was intelligent, he was simple, he was really the guy that you wanted to have with you. So this was one of the things that we are exploring. We have done some other things with media. The biggest challenge that we have is getting to get the material. It's not easy to get the material. Not all the media are really putting that on their website, so we're trying to find new ways and innovative ways to make this monitoring work. The second issue is policy. We want to explain, as I was telling you, some policy issues. I think the biggest issue that we're facing right now in Colombia is the transitional system, the justice peace system. For those of you who don't know, we recently signed a peace agreement with FARC guerrilla, which involved, as in many other countries, building a transitional justice system. This is falling right now in the specific timing of elections, so it became a big issue for the candidates, and what we have seen is candidates using this to disinform and really confuse an electorate that is already very, very confused. So in this clip, you're going to see a fake news seal that we're trying to use, like to pin down things that we believe are misinforming the public, and also another thing that I have introduced, which is using some characters, which was something that just came about after some episodes. In this one, you will see a taxi driver.
El caso es que la JEP es para delitos relacionados con el conflicto armado. Es solo para eso y no para otra cosa. Esto, por ejemplo, es mentira.
La justicia transicional hecha para perdonar los delitos de quienes estaban condenados o sindicados de haber cometido delitos atroces no puede ser ahora el órgano de retaliación contra los contradictores políticos del sector productivo de este país y en general 48 millones de colombianos a los que nos cambiaron el juez natural.
Oiga, y esos de la JEP no me perdonan un parte que me pusieron que ir. Salí ahí en pico y placa y me clavaron. ¿No se puede?
So this is Germán Vargas Lleras, former Vice President of Colombia, who was using at the beginning of the campaign an issue to just scare people out. I just have one more clip of 30 seconds, and it's politicians. I wanted to show you former President Pastrana invented a meeting that he had with President Trump, which was very strange because President Trump hasn't met yet with Juan Manuel Santos at that moment. You are going to see an overacted journalist and a remix that we did with US media, and I finished there.
En abril pasado, el expresidente Andrés Pastrana compartió a través de Twitter una reunión de altísimo nivel que había tenido. Gracias a POTUS, Real Donald Trump, por la cordial y muy franca conversación sobre problemas y perspectivas de Colombia y la región. Lamentablemente, según confirmaron 5 meseros, 40 cámaras de seguridad y un gato que iba pasando, la reunión fue en realidad un saludo en el pasillo.
These people are sick. These people are sick. It never happened. Never happened. It's a lie.
Thank you very much.
I'm Harris. I come from Bosnia and Herzegovina. If you don't know what the place is, it's the little country in the Balkans. We like to shoot at each other from time to time, you know? Right. Yeah, that's a little bit better. So, well, you've probably worked on some news on it, right? Yeah, okay. So, I run a satire magazine that is online, and I'm very frustrated by being here. Please, Rosenthal, sir, in the future, put us somewhere in front. Not because we are so important, but after all these numbers and so on, we feel really, really, really depressed. Because, like, I have an audience of almost 20% of my population, and it's about a half of a video of a BuzzFeed. Come on. It's depressing. I'm dying here, you know. So basically, our platform is called Satro Info. We are doing a political satire, economical satire, media satire, and whatnot. We believe that we criticize the society in a way it should be criticized through humor, and we also do a lot of fact-checking through humor. How can this happen when we're also branded as fake news sometimes? Well, for example, the other day there was a big news in Bosnia. Hooters open up in Sarajevo. Rock on, Hooters, right? No, it's a gross place. But the point is that we didn't even get the chance to mock the sexistic propaganda and the business model of the place, but we had to correct the facts because it wasn't real Hooters. It was a fake Hooters, and all the media published it, and only us fact-checked it. Then a fact-checking organization did as well, but we were the first, and we published the news because we are Onion type. Actually, we are a fusion, but now let's stick to this. We're Onion type organization, and we published an article in Sarajevo opened almost Hooters. So, and we got the different reactions, like how we are the only media that got the information correctly, because it was really widespread. Even CNN affiliate published it. So basically, what we do is try to mock some things that are now in a mainstream media, and we try to point in the right direction, and we believe so, and we believe that we're doing so, especially with the young people. All right, I'll just show some numbers that I have. Like we're 16 months old, we are pretty young. We have almost 2,000 articles already. We have more than 600,000 visits, which is, as I said, more than 20% of our population. And we like to believe that is even more if you include the digits about internet usage of our population, but that's just us, you know, liking to be liked a bit more than it is. So, yeah, that's about it. I really want to finish it quickly and leave you to some questions and comments later. Thank you.
Welcome to Zambezi News, where we bring you the news faster than it takes to get rid of two bungling imposters.
We bring you the news as factual and indomitable as two veteran newscasters who aren't going anywhere anytime soon.
We bring you the news reliable, like an authoritarian yet loving and fatherly ruler.
Irreplaceable, irrevocable, undisputable, unperturbable.
We put the swag in News Wagon.
Impeccable, ungrateful, impetuous, infectious.
The facts straight to your desk, like the early boy who gets to his school desk early before the other kids get there later after him.
Indivisible, indestructible, immovable, inoculation, innocent, bystander, bilateral, bilingual, bilocal, by decree, for us, by us, FUBU, or five.
So, how do you resist the authoritarian regime of Robert Mugabe? Some take to the streets, others write articles. We decided to take the sophisticated and intelligent route of taking the piss out of the government. More specifically, taking the piss out of the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation, the ZBC, which is state-controlled and is the only TV station in the country. Zimbabwe, you can all hear me? Yes? In Zimbabwe, we tend to like things in ones. One TV station, one president for life. So the clip you just saw was Zambezi News, where we have bungling newscasters who parody the ZBC, issuing out hilarious propaganda. We started in 2011, at a time when social media and internet wasn't big in Zimbabwe. So we went old school, and we would produce tens of thousands of DVDs to distribute across the country, because for obvious reasons, the only TV station in the country wouldn't broadcast us. So we distributed over 10,000 DVDs of the first season. We got overwhelming feedback, really positive feedback, but the best feedback we got was from one viewer who wrote in saying, "I can't believe this is the state of our national broadcaster. I can't believe their standards have sunk so low." And we turned to each other and were like, "Comrades, we've achieved our dream. People think we are the ZBC. We can quit." Zambezi News is now 5 seasons in. We've reached over 2.2 million households across Southern Africa through satellite TV. We've been featured on the CNN, on CNN, The Guardian, Channel 4, and so on. We believe that we've been at least part of inspiring a new political satire movement in Zimbabwe, which in 2011, I guess for obvious reasons, political satire wasn't exactly a thing because of fear. Since then, internet and social media have become much more widespread in Zimbabwe. Out of a population of 13 million, we've got about 5 million Zimbabweans with some form of access to the internet. So since then, we've also come up with a new program called The Week, which is a kind of a political roundup of the weekly kind of burning political events that happen. And we've done this exclusively for the YouTube generation. So this is, we distribute this on Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp. It's got us in a lot of trouble, but also reaches a big youth audience in Zimbabwe. We got over 1.5 million views on Facebook for 2017. That's our primary distribution platform. And we reach up to 400,000 viewers per season. I'm sure you're kind of saying, well, yeah, but how do you get away with this in Zimbabwe? I'd like to categorically state that in Zimbabwe, we have freedom of expression. We just don't have freedom after expression. Which means that we never know when the guys in dark glasses and suits are going to come after us. And 2017 was a beautiful example of that. The year started with the city council trying to come and demolish our offices. By middle of the year, the police were threatening to shut down our festival for performing political comedy. And by the end of the year, the state had arrested our Magamba TV producer, Martha O'Donovan, who was in charge of all our political satire. They accused her of trying to overthrow the government. They locked her up in high security prison, and soon after that, they raided our offices and confiscated our laptops. And this was all happening at a time when tanks were rolling into the streets and a coup apparently was about to start. We all went into safe houses, woke up the next morning, and on the TV was a general who had taken over the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation, a long-time dream of ours, saying the situation has now gotten to another level, but this is not a coup. This is a military-assisted transition. And this is true. We do have probably the most helpful military in the world. They helped our previous president to retire. So we saw this on the news, and we're in safe houses, and we're kind of like, so, I mean, you know that charge of trying to overthrow a constitutional government? I think the military beat us to it. And so we rushed back to our offices to shoot a new episode of The Week. There was so much fake news going on at the time. A coup had happened. Mugabe had been removed. And so we went in to shoot a new episode of The Week, which has become our most popular one to date. I'm going to show a short clip from it. We called it "This Is Not a Coup." We tried to be patriotic and listen to our military.
Okay, comrades, I would like to apologize for not being on your screens for some time now. The police, they confiscated our laptops, so we couldn't broadcast, but I've been reflecting, and I would like to apologize to you all. I think it was ill-advised of us not to give you The Week. We are still young and growing, and we learn from our mistakes. So we are back on your screens now. And please also know I haven't been forced or coerced to make this statement by English social media users. I've made it of my own volition. So we give you The Week.
Ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends, welcome to The Week with me, Comrade Fatso. And this is the week when a coup did not happen. No, this is not a coup. This is a coup. You cool? I'm cool.
So, yeah. So Robert Mugabe is gone. We've got a new president in power. We're criticizing the new government, and we like to think that maybe we're having the last laugh. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, hello. Can you listen? Yes. I think we're 8 because Maria Teresa told Rosenthal, we're going to invite 8, only 4 will come. And we're like, no, we're all coming. So do I have a clicker or do I click here? Okay. I can use, okay. So I am the co-founder, editor of El Chigüiro Bipolar, which is a satirical news site from Venezuela. We're 10 years old at the moment. And this is what we do. Satirical website that gives comic twist on the real news that happen in Venezuela. And I'm going to walk you through how we have survived for these 10 years. I'm going to show you some headlines, and I hope you like them. The first rule to survive in sort of dictatorship or full-on dictatorship that we have, and the first protection that you have is to actually be funny. If you're not funny, you're not going to work. This, for example, evading basic services like water and electricity, Amish family moves to Venezuela. And they're in the other side of the road, so they're not going to last long. This is another example. After government were taking passport from people, government says that you don't need passport because reading is the best way to travel. We also produce some shows, web shows, OTT shows, that also satirize reality. I'm going to show you 3 clips. One is from Pero Tenemos Patria, with a web show with over 1 million viewers per episode. Then it's a clip of a kind of failed show. We try to do broadcast-style TV with the Chigüiro language. And the other one is a clip in which we see some sort of us making fun of how the government takes food stamps in form of food boxes to control the people. No.
Bienvenidos todos a Pero Tenemos Patria, el programa... Oye, denme un minutico que voy a mandar un mensaje en este live y seguimos con el programa, ¿sí?
Vamos a leer algunos mensajes que nos están mandando por aquí. ¿No? Por aquí me dicen imbécil. Yo le digo que Dios te bendiga.
Amén, mi presidente, amén.
Y asumo como propio el concepto de nueva ciudad que ha esgrimido en su campaña electoral como compromiso el compañero gobernador del estado Mérida, Héctor Rodríguez.
Presidente, Héctor Rodríguez no es el gobernador de Mérida.
¿Qué dije yo?
Dijo Mérida, presidente, dijo Mérida.
¿Y cómo es?
El presidente, Héctor Rodríguez es el gobernador del estado Miranda, presidente.
¿Qué dije yo?
Bienvenidos a Chigüiro Bipolar Noticias, donde la noticia eres tú, aunque no literalmente porque la noticia es la noticia y ustedes son los espectadores. Les saluda Tinedo Fígaro.
Y Ana Virginia Fuentes.
Ahora leamos el teleprompter.
Jóvenes que se van del país asisten a despedida del único que se queda en Venezuela. Carlos Gómez es oficialmente el último joven venezolano de clase media que se queda en Venezuela.
Más Cerdita hizo una caja especial para Pepa.
¿Pepa? Tengo esta caja Clap full de comida para ti. Gracias por este regalo. No es un regalo. Ahora tienes que apoyar al PSV. Pero yo no quiero apoyar al PSV solo por una caja. Pues para eso hemos hecho que pases hambre. Para que cuando te demos esta caja pienses que somos buenos. ¿Y podré preparar el risotto que tanto me gusta? No. Solo trae pasta y caraota. Ok, está bien. Lo voy a aceptar porque no tengo comida. Pero igual, nunca seré chavista.
One other thing that's very important for us is to be on top of the news, be on top of current events, and timing is important. And in social media, we've raised over 2 million followers on Twitter, and that's because of this. Timing is very important. For example, we take this news. The PSUV Municipal Council appointed a new authority in Maturin, that is a small city, after they arrested, an arrest warrant issued against an opposition-elected mayor. So they threw out a mayor, and we put in Attila the Hun. So in this, it's very important for us because we basically not only take what's happening, but we also inform our audience on the news. When you read this article, you backlink to Efecto Cocuyo, which did the actual reporting, so you have an informed laugh, so to say. One thing that's very important for us and confuses the government a little bit is that we also make fun of the opposition, and they like that. For example, in Search of Intelligent Life, NASA sends probe to Moon headquarters. That's the opposition headquarters. Or divided opposition, undecided on how to reply government's attempt to divide opposition. It's very important to do weird stuff, weird shit, and it's important for us to praise the government and get into their language and kind of attack from their point of view. So heroic Maduro releases mimes from imaginary box. Or government invests 75 billion in branches to cover holes in streets. It's important for us to make fun of ourselves as Venezuelans and the people who are reading us, and sometimes the extremes in our own party. This is a honest conversation about gay marriage inequality interrupted by guy yelling, "Ay, parchita!" It's also a comment on the homophobic ambience in Venezuela. And Venezuelans ask for price controls on everything except their own business because it's very popular there. It's important to have a great team. If somebody noticed we skipped 6, okay, I'm not going to tell you 6. It's important to have a great team to let them grow in the space that we created. And for us, it's very important to find the best talented people, creatives in Venezuela, and let them grow within our ecosystem. And I want to, they're very happy, as you can see. And they're all comedians. They maybe leave at 5 because they have a stand-up comedy set, and we let them. It's part of the way we do things. One last clip, if I can show you. Yes. Okay. One last clip. This is from a series we did called Lista Presidencial. And this is Chavez's reaction, in which we sent the presidents of Latin America to a desert island to fence for themselves. Oh no, this is the weirdest thing we've done. Just a second.
Completamente enamorados, como borrachos yo no sé de qué, entre las sombras de los árboles.
Otro día vino mi hijo con una, papá mira esto, aquí nos ponen a ustedes, nos ponen a todos nosotros a Evo. Y entonces hay un momento en el que Evo está cantando y yo le digo, Evo, ahí no va coro, Evo.
Amarnos bien. No, ahí no entra coro, Evo. Pero Chico, cállate, si no sabes cantar, no canten.
Y le ponen la voz de nosotros, compadre. Gozan un igualito.
Por ahí se burlan en la isla presidencial de mí, porque yo siempre digo esa palabra. Qué bonito, qué hermoso.
Qué linda, qué bonitas mariposas. Las voy a meter en un frasco para siempre, ¿verdad? Para que vuelen libremente por donde yo les diga.
Además me ponen muy bruto, yo no soy tan bruto así. Y muy gordo, me llaman el gordo.
Pues soy con S y con Z. Uno puede cometer errores ortográficos cuando piensa. ¡Qué difícil es pensar!
Se la hace el hijo de Rabel.
So, okay, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, I hope you had it was fun, yeah, it was fun. So I'm just gonna make a couple of questions and then we'll open up to the public that surely you have lots of questions to make. So my first question to you all, and whoever wants to answer it, you don't need to go one by one like as it's compulsory, no. One of the things that we perceive is that humorists have a bigger freedom of expression, or maybe, what is it, not freedom after expression. They have more freedom of movement. But on the other hand, the risk is higher. It's like you have more freedom, people are tolerating you, but at the same time, if you really hurt somebody in power, you really hurt them badly. How do you feel about it? Do you think that's the way you feel, or do you think that it's different in the different cases of your different countries? I think I will start with Harris, since he was the shortest one of all of you, and then we'll go whoever wants to speak.
Well, yeah, I mean, we have this policy, take no prisoners. You know about it. You're Americans, right? That's not so funny, right? All right. We take no prisoners in our humor and satire, and when we get threats, we just handle it. For example, there was one mister who wanted to rape our children. We said we don't have children yet in the newsroom. Yeah. We don't, really. We didn't make any yet. So basically, what we feel a bit more free than other media in Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially in the sense of politics, because we can say what nobody can say. For example, we translated the conclusions of European Commission we said we translated to Bosnian language, but actually they were already translated. But we translated it in a way that none of the media couldn't do because of the professionalism. But basically, I think what we wrote is the most true conclusions of European Commission wrapped around in a very diplomatic blah, 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 blah.
Harris, you make a lot of fun of different nationalities. The Croats, the Serbs, the Bosnians that are living in your country, and that's something sort of sacred for everybody, and yet you want to do away with this kind of patriotism, no?
Yeah, well, because we think that this nationality thing between three more or less tribes within 3.something million people is such a ridiculous thing because, I mean, look at USA. I mean, this is a very positive example. There's like hundreds of nationalities and ethnicities and identities and whatever. And like, we can handle our three ethnicities and we mock that all the time. For example, here's one, we have 3 presidents. And that's not a joke, we do. Really, like 3 presidents.
Sitting.
That's really funny, and it's really reality. Like the only country in the world. Just because of this stupidity that we have, like, you know, 3 nationalities, and then who is better, who is not better. And also, our constitution is discriminatory because Roma, Jew, any other American or Italian can't be a president of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but only like 3 main nationalities.
Thank you, Harris. Anybody wants to comment about the freedom?
About the freedoms, I think it started off like that. That's what we felt when we started. It's like, yeah, we have more freedoms and we could play a little bit more. We never had bylines and we still don't have bylines. And we thought that would protect us to an extent. It didn't. Now I would be arrested in a lot of countries if I come close to them in the Middle East, and everyone works underground, no one is known, everyone's always on edge, and we're just left to see how long we could make it until they decide that that they want to end what we do. So it started off with those freedoms, but it didn't, like, they picked up. That's the problem. It depends on how. You could imagine what tolerance Saudi has, for example. Like, it's not much, and we don't leave anyone from our criticism in the whole region. So,
despite your effort to bring all these different audiences and talk to them,
it's not about the audiences. It's about those few in power. Like they're very few, and they're very, very powerful, and they have, and one of the main problems is that their power extends beyond. So, for example, I wouldn't be able to go back home because of something I wrote on Saudi. Like, that's just, it's a different country. Like, the fact that it could cross borders, how it could be affected, like, makes you very aware of what you do at all times.
Mariana, you had a story, a very funny story about how the police took your cartoons and they were laughing. Tell us a little bit about that story.
When we tried to organize exhibition, no one gave us a space, and we decided to do open-air exhibition. After that exhibition, we have many policemen visited our exhibition, and after that, our car was broken, and criminal case opened. I went to police to write an explanation what happened and about all these things, and police, they open our website and they start to look our cartoons. It was cartoon about ombudsman, silence, and about the person who is sitting on presidential chair. They were laughing, laughing, and they came to police cartoon. They became very serious. And one of them asked me, do not do such things, do not cartoon policemen. And I answered with the words that president usually use. And it was very funny because they were shocked. And I think coming to your question, some of our friends, they usually tell us that we didn't take everything serious. I think this is the way maybe we can work and survive. We are even answering the tweets or pressing with another cartoon. So I think we hope this works.
Anybody else wants to
The answer
make it?
is a hope. I hope the government have a sense of humor. It's the only thing.
Yeah.
King, why are they so afraid, King, do you think, of humor? I mean, at the end, you're just making people laugh and think. The powerful, people who are powerful, you wouldn't think that they should be afraid. Why would they be afraid? They have so much power. They have guns. They have...
I think for us, it's because the work we do is very well accepted by the public, and it trickles down all the way to the kids. So a lot of times, the politicians would be very scared of what we'll mention, how we'll highlight them, because their families and their children ask them questions. And a lot of times, politicians have come up to us and say, please, avoid talking about some of us for the sake of our reputations. But you see, that's the thing. You're in public office. We shouldn't have to avoid you. Yeah.
Their skin is very thin, I think, because I think part of it is just because they know they don't belong, and it's just like they're a G.
I think it's also just always difficult knowing, like people always ask, when do you know if you've crossed the line, or do you have a line? And it's quite difficult knowing what that line is, because on the one hand, we know that quite a few government ministers watch our stuff. And we found that out in kind of weird ways. You're like at a big media conference, and the Minister of Information and Communication Technologies is making a speech there, and then it's question and answer time. And I asked him a question. He goes, Comrade Fatso, yeah, I follow you. And you're kind of worried there. Do you follow me in the old school sense? Of like, you got your old school follow, like follow back Friday with your dudes in dark suits following me. It's like, no, I follow you on social media. I was like, whew, all right, that's cool. But he said, I find some of your clips quite entertaining, and some of your criticism quite enlightening. And you're kind of like, oh, okay, so these dudes do, they do watch it, I think, maybe to get a sense of also what young people are thinking. But you never know when you've crossed the line, because I think we did a special on former President Mugabe's birthday. He always has a big birthday bash, and we did a special on it, and we're just taking the piss how old he was, and how his cake cost $1 million and so forth. And then it was like the week after that where the city council kind of arrived and decided to try and demolish our offices. So you never know. Where is that line?
Talking about that, Carlos, you are in a country where probably the most important humorist of all times was assassinated. And so there is not a matter of being put in jail, it's a matter of being killed. How do you do it in terms of I see it a little bit like a boxing match, like you punch them sometimes and then you go back. It's like it's like a dance all the time, so that you don't go too far as you cannot do it again. How do you see that relationship with power? Like you're always...
So just to give some context, in Colombia, between 1985 and 2010, about 100 journalists were murdered. Jaime Garzón, who was a big political satirist, was murdered in 1999. So that are big numbers. The country has experienced an improvement in the situation in the last 10 years. So I do feel there's more confidence to go out there and just try to do something new. And I'm not talking only about myself, but about new projects that are emerging there as Actualidad Panamericana, La Puya, people that are trying to do this. So on the one hand, I feel that the environment is better. But on the other hand, on one of these, there are so many topics that are not being discussed thoroughly. So one of the things that are out there is the ties that former President Uribe might have with right-wing paramilitary groups, the things that haven't been uncovered on corruption of Odebrecht, for example. And when I did this series about the Attorney General, many people start emailing you, sending you DMs, telling you, look, you should just go after this lead. And one of the things that I sort of tried to decide was we are going first to build ourselves in a more secure way, like really have a strong base, really be something that people are aware about before starting just picking fights that we are not really able to follow through. So I really expect that if La Mesa becomes something stronger, we are going to be able to go after big fights. But this, for now, showing how ridiculed they make out of themselves in media, the interviews they give, the relationships they have with the powerful, are like the fights that I think we can pick up right now and show them how we are really after them. And one of the things that Juan was saying, that they should be aware that La Mesa is not owing anything to anyone. So that's something that I'm trying to build in this year as a base.
Juan, in Venezuela, you have to have a lot of humor to have hope. Do you think you're building that hope with your humor?
I think it's a mix. I think we're satirizing what's happening, and people understand that we're not making fun of the suffering, but we're making fun of the powerful. And by holding the powerful accountable, you're at least driving in the right direction. I wouldn't say that we give hope with humor. I think that's a stretch. But at least we're helping to bridge the gap with the censorship that we have on TV and radio. That's basically all news are controlled in Venezuela. And with our satire, I think we're helping. On the other hand, I don't think that we're a top priority for them. I think they have politicians, and I think they have investigative journalists that they're really after, that they have bigger fish to fry, we believe.
Do you think there's a possibility, and this is a question open to all, and with this we close this part and we open to the public. Do you think there's a possibility of marrying these two forces, like investigative journalism and humor, and so that it can actually have give humor more potency and give like investigative journalism more reach?
Yeah, one show we produce is called Pero Tenemos Patria. No, it's called El Reporte Semanal with El Profesor Briseño. It's in an OTT called Vivo Play. And we added journalists to the team. And it's working pretty good. They're collaborating. He's finding stories. They're finding funny ways to express them. So I think that's a first step. Then maybe collaborating with other mediums. So I think that's, for sure, that's a possibility. And you're doing your own investigation, right?
Yeah, we check our sources as well. Even if it doesn't appear in the news, we sometimes report on it in our way, of course, but sometimes we call our sources in major political parties just to check on stuff.
Anybody has any questions?
That's the last guy who's living in Venezuela.
He was the last guy living.
Yes, I still live there. Hi, thank you. I'm Ricardo del Búfalo. I'm a comedian from Venezuela. And I have this question. I only see one woman in the panel. And in Venezuela, we have few women that are comedians. I wonder, what do you think, why there's more male comedians than women comedians?
Actually, I'm not a comedian.
So 0.
Investigative journalism and journalists, and we work together with my team, and this helps us to create more powerful cartoons, because we use all the tools that we use in journalism. We bring together, and this is not an answer to your question, but in any case, I don't know the reason.
I think for us, with our experience, it's just, I think it goes down to what I was talking about earlier about conservatism, because people are just like, it's that one level further. It's that disrespect. It's getting yourself out there, and that is something that really, really gets a woman uncomfortable in the region. So it's like from our contributors, there's about a 10%, and we're kind of really happy with that. It started off with like really almost zero at all times. And even when we tried to hire people who weren't comedians just to work with the team, just like that sense of association was enough for women to run away. And we haven't found the way to work around that yet. We're luring them in slowly into it. But, yeah.
What about Africa? Is there a lot of women comedians in Africa? I mean, comedians, I'm using the same word. Humorists, yeah, political humorists, yeah.
I think our team
satire.
Our team, a satire team of writers, the lead writer or head of department has always been a woman for some reason.
Amazing.
I'm not
so
sure.
We should have invited her, not you.
Invite her next time.
But you're the king, yeah.
I think having the perspective, I would say, there's too much of a similar perspective from an all-male, kind of team, in my opinion. And they, at least in my experience from our team, they always want to be the guys helping drive the story or direct the story. So I think maybe there's more freedom in that sense than in the areas, yeah.
Than in the other areas.
Yeah. I mean, to add on to what King was saying, I mean, I know his team and they're great. In terms of, I think in both of our societies, but I mean, we're coming from quite patriarchal societies, so the lack of women's representation it's
structural.
Yeah, it's a structural thing, and so also I think as satirists, as media activists, it's also about taking conscious efforts within your organization to make sure that you're giving space to women's voices. So for our show, The Week, for example, the director and editor is a woman. For quite a few, all of our satire shows, actually, the woman is a producer. But we're wanting to now, we're consciously moving towards getting more women script writers and comedians involved. So we're working on a new project, which is going to be an all-woman project on political satire, female producer, female director, female script writers, and female voiceovers. Because I don't think you're not able to combat sexism if you don't take active measures against it.
What about Latin America?
Well, I would say that it's also a matter of really turning the tide on the long traditional issues that the media has. I mean, female workers in the media have been underrepresented for a long time, and we at least in La Mesa belong to a project that is led by a woman, by Juanita León, who founded La Silla Vacía. So my expectation would be to be able to build within the creative team a representative sample, not only because we need to have women there, because there are such different views to bring into the table, such different humor, that is something that if we don't build in a really diverse way, we're not going to do strong political satire in the country. So that's a challenge.
Juan, any thoughts? I think we have to close down. I'm so sorry. You have lots of questions. Can we do one more question? Yeah, one more question.
Hello. This feels unfair. I'm also Venezuelan. And I also live in Venezuela, so that makes two of us. So my name is Elena Carpio, and I'm wondering, we live in a world of growing polarization, right? And ever more people seem to be so grounded in their own opinions, and we have confirmation bias, that it's sometimes hard to penetrate those opinions. And and get involved in a conversation. So I was wondering, because humor has the capacity to sometimes break down those walls and start conversations where there wouldn't be any in other cases, what are you doing to fight polarization in your countries? And is that important to you at all?
Yes, no? No.
10 seconds answer to Juan, who hasn't spoken that much.
I think it's possible to change people's opinions, but the way that we do it is just, and I repeat what I said, making fun of ourselves and making people realize how silly the decisions we're making look. I think that sums it up, kind of. Yeah. Please clap.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so we have the Facebook workshop that is in the Capitol room, the overflow room there, for people who have already registered. And other people, please walk to the Texas restaurant at the AT&T, same place as yesterday. And remember, we have a shorter time for lunch. Come back here to 1:45. Thank you. Thank you.